And we're recording, so that's maybe a good thing to know, is everyone is being recorded today. And let me see, I'm going to share my screen. And I think everybody is aware of this document. This is a common notes document for today. You can put that link in the window, in the chat. That's the common notes. And yeah, so this is the third, and let's say the final workshop, at least of this first phase of the JSON-LD COVID-19 program, where we're going to try and then have these CDAR templates that have been designed and built by you and your colleagues in circulation throughout the rest of the duration of the COVID program. And there will be a lot of continuing effort going on after this dataset template workshop is over, but at least you will have available to you then, I would say by the end of June, 3 CDAR templates that you can use throughout the project. And I'll try and through just a few slides in just a few minutes here to kind of review what we've done and see where this workshop is positioned in that. But I wanted to just highlight this document so everyone was aware of it. All the basic information for the workshop today, and then the next 3 workshops in this series are there. There's an agenda also in the document. And what you can see is, we'll do a brief introduction here, and then really we are led by Nicola in this case in how to work with this generic data set metadata template and how to customize it for our purposes. There's a scheduled break of 15 minutes after this introductory material. And then there's a long haul. There's 2 hours and 30 minutes where we actually build a vocabulary, but that will also be, there'll be moments for taking a brief break or pause in there as well. And then we'll try to end, also just kind of round out the day and talk about the next workshop and a little bit about long-term metadata governance in the COVID program. And this is an idea that's now starting to take shape as well. After these workshops, what happens with these vocabularies and these templates? And we'll say a few words about that. And let me jump then to some slides. And these are available to you at this link here. So I'll put that in the chat window as well. This is and there's I think all the essential links for these workshops are in the slide deck, so they're there. So real quick, just to mention a few things about this workshop. And first and foremost are the acknowledgements, because if I'm afraid if I don't do it now, we'll never have time later. But Nicola will be leading the workshop today, and on Wednesday, is it?
Thursday.
Thursday. So the 1st and the 3rd of June. And then there will be another 2 workshops in the series that Barbara will lead after that. And we'll try and explain that a little bit as time goes on. And then there's other people that are very important here, especially Jeroen, who's been our knowledge source for, this interface between the domain stuff, the real knowledge part, and the semantics and the technical part. There's the agenda we already talked about. And here's the progression. We have been kind of activated since around March 2020 with this COVID pandemic. And sometime between then and the summertime, Margreet and JSON-LD were able to launch the COVID-19 research program. So a real Dutch national response to COVID. And there was a fair data stewardship mandate from the beginning built into this program. And so in October, we launched the Metadata for Machine workshops with an introduction to CDAR. And I was part of that. John Graybeal from Stanford University gave us an introduction to CDAR. And then by November, we had a series of Metadata for Machine workshops based on these topics. And we went into that workshop with a project administrative metadata template that the M4M team created, before we started these workshops. So we kind of created this on your behalf. It was really on behalf of Zone and Bay. The project admin templates are really useful for the funder themselves to keep track of the projects. Excuse me. In November, we brainstormed on project assets and everything about your research inputs and outputs. And then there was a period of time over the holidays where we tried to consolidate these brainstorm sessions and to refine and begin to see a kind of vocabulary that would be responsive to all the different needs in all these different workshops. And so by February, we ran another 2 workshops on vocabularies where we were building this content level vocabulary. And that resulted in the project content metadata template. And just a few days ago, we circulated the final version of this template and its vocabulary and a mini guidelines document. And we're now asking the original participants of the M4Ms to complete their content template along with their admin template. And this should really well characterize each and every project in the program. And then now we start here in June, this Dataset workshop, where we're going to build one more template, this Dataset template. And what you will see is that mainly we're going to be focusing again on vocabularies. We take the template as a kind of a given, at least at this point. It can be modified later, but this template now needs to be fitted with appropriate vocabularies that will speak to your data sets. And that's the business that we do today. And then there's also on the 16th now of June, we have a governance workshop where we begin talking about the long-term maintenance of these templates and these vocabularies, because what we will see is over time, new terminologies will come up and people would like to augment the vocabulary with new terms. So we need a process in place for that. The overall summary is kind of like this. There's these 2 templates that are really at the project level. And what that means is that you make this template, you fill it in once, and that's good for the duration of the project because it's for your project. So you only need to do this once and it's there forever. In contrast, the Dataset template, for as many data sets as you create, you would like to have a metadata description of that. So you might make potentially many instances, you might fill out this form quite a lot whenever you make a new data set. And you might even need to make new templates over time. But in any case, this is kind of an ongoing thing, and some skills at CDAR and vocabularies will be useful there. Nicola will tell you all about this to come in the rest of the sessions today. But this is a snapshot of what the Dataset metadata template looks like. And you can see a lot of very generic things that are important to know about the data set, like its type and who created it and the rights for using this data. But there's important fields here on subjects and variables. These are the 2 keys to this data set, or at least that's what will take up our time in the next workshop series. So here's kind of the progression for that. Here's this data set template. Nicola has created this in a previous metadata for machine workshop, and it's really generic for any data set. Anything you're willing to call a data set, you can use this template to describe it. And what we will do in this workshop is think about the vocabulary primarily for the subject and the variable fields. And we'll do that June 1 and June 3. And then we should end up with a specific dataset metadata template. For example, survey datasets or genomics datasets or cohort studies, anything else. And we can figure out how to make then these dataset templates that work for us. The next two workshops, if you're able to attend, are these. It's going to be led by Barbara, and she will apply this iAdopt model that she developed in the RDA with many other colleagues. And this allows you to describe variables with real precision in a machine actionable way. So I'm just listing some example variables here that you might find in the genomics data set. And then what you have is, a really great description of variables. Those variables are a part of a larger data set, and that data set can be linked to your content metadata or your administrative metadata. And then we have a pretty good overview of your project and also the actual measurements and variables and observables that you have. I have a summary slide here, slide 19. It's just a bunch of useful links. That's our common notes that I've already linked to, but for those of you who've joined, I'll put this back in the chat. There's we have an OSF page. It's in the same place that you've seen before, but a lot of the materials from today are parked right there. There's the generic dataset and metadata template that we're starting with. And then there's some homework elements that we had sent out in the emails. And I'm going to stop there. Later on today, at the end of the day, I'll talk more about this vocabulary governance and these issues and how we will try to set up some long-term persistence on that. Okay, and with that, I can take a few questions or I hand it over to Nicola. Yeah. So Nicola, why don't you take over at this point?
Yes, sure. Stop sharing the screen.
Yep.
Good morning, everyone. So as Eric mentioned, today and on June and in 2 days from now, we are going to deal with updating generic dataset metadata template to curate it to be specific for your project or for your specific field of study. So just going to quickly give you an intro, again, like presenting with this GDMT, and then we will really jump into a discussion of how you're building control vocabularies. I know that you already did a lot of work with Barbara so far, but this time you will really learn a tooling and go through this process so you can see how it goes, like how you're creating those terms and how you're defining them, and at the end how you're setting up and spinning up a service that will convert the Google Sheet document into the semantic artifact that is deployed on web. So we will go through the whole process, and I will lead you to this exercise that we'll have today. But also on the second day of the GDMT, I'll do the same thing for modifying the GDMT inside of the Cedar platform. So quickly on intro to day one. So here I'm just presenting you what becomes like more and more prevailing way of organizing data. It's called Data Catalog Vocabulary, or DCAT. This is how actually Fair Data Point operates. There are 3 levels of information. You have a collection of data sets, then you have a data set, and then you have at the last, at the bottom, you have a distribution, which is one of the potential distribution of the data set. So collection and data sets are rather abstract. They don't really exist. Distribution is what you're actually delivering. For example, data set can come as an Excel sheet, but that same data set can be represented as a text file or can be spin up on the MySQL database, but it is still the same data set, but just distributed in different file formats. For every layer that we have in this DCAT organization, we need the metadata. So you need the collection metadata about the collection of data sets, then you need the metadata about the data set, and finally you need the metadata about the distribution. What we are going to focus ourselves today and in 2 days from now are data set level and distribution. The reason is that the collection is usually, the metadata about the collection is usually set up by those who are running the data repository, or for example, fair data points. So it's basically more on the technical side. Here's where, and it's usually, there is nothing, should not be nothing domain specific, should be very much generic way of how collection is described. Here is where most of the work is done, how you're describing the data set, and then how you're describing a specific distribution of the data set being described. So this is where we are going to spend time. And for simplicity, we fuse those two metadata templates into one, because usually the first time you're describing the data set, you're at the same time describing its first distribution format. So that's why when we build the generic data set metadata template, we fuse the fields and corresponding elements of the data set and distribution into one, because then it's much easier to fill it in and to also build the control vocabularies for them. Eric already showed you this slide, which indicates all the elements, which means elements, as you remember from the previous work on CEDAR, elements contain fields which are similar in a way. So there are much more fields, which simply I couldn't show you all of them here because there's almost 100 of them, but don't be scared, there's only 10 of them which are really mandatory to be filled in. But they're just showing you now high-level grouping for a template that you're seeing here. So we have these typical elements which you see on the left side. These are the elements that you usually see when you go and fill in metadata templates, or say Zenodo or B2Share or any platform that allows you to generate DOI, because they are actually derived from the data site schema, which is used to generate, and it's like necessary to have certain fields in it to be filled in to get the digital object identifier. On the right side of the screen, you see here the extension elements, which further describe details about the data set, which we call extension elements, and that's fields which can describe data streams in case you have them, which you have an instrument measuring something, then data source, then variable, then everything about spatial temporal coverage of the data. And finally, there is information about the specific distribution of this data set. These are very generic fields and elements, and the way how, as Eric mentioned, how we curate them to be domain specific is that basically we are building control vocabularies. Potentially, you will see when we go much more into GDMT on the second day, you might say that you're missing some of the fields and you're just going to extend it in that sense. But you're going to be trained on how you go through this whole process of editing and improving the template itself, so you really turn it into the semantic artifact. So all the exercises are built in that way. Actually, these three green fields that are elements for which we are going to create ZON-LD vocabularies to turn it into SDMT, as Eric called it. And the good thing that in the previous workshop, you already built one control vocabulary that we can already reuse in GDMT to curate the GDMT for our purposes. And there is this further description that you provided about the specific type of data, which will find its place inside of the resource type, and we further describe what is the type of the data set. Today, we are going to focus on building control vocabulary of subjects, and then variables will be, as Eric mentioned, much more, you go much more in details of how to build that kind of control vocabulary with I adopt idea and concepts and approaches that Barbara will present you. Just to give you an idea why we are actually going to build control vocabulary of subjects and variables in order to turn this into the ZON-LD specific template. Simply, when you have a data, that you use that data to do specific investigation of a thing. That thing that you investigate with data is a subject. Subjects are usually also called themes or topics, but it's more common to call it subject because it actually comes from the control vocabularies called Dublin core terms, and that's how it happens. So you have a data set, and with the data set you can investigate a specific subject. The data set might or might not have certain set of variables. So with that certain set of variables, you're investigating that data set. And subjects and variables are very domain specific. There might be an overlap from one domain to another, but usually they're specific to the domain for which you, for example, in this case, curate generic data set metadata template. And we learned this through many years of working in this kind of area of metadata, is that usually what differentiate one domain from another specific to data are the subjects or the topics or themes that are investigated with data set and the variables that the data sets contain in order to do this kind of analysis or investigation. So this is just quickly from my side, the intro, and then we will basically jump into the introduction to the machine actionability right after these slides. So if you have any questions before while I'm switching to another slide deck, please feel free to ask. Questions?
Maybe I can just mention as well, you know, Nicola was talking about the fair data point, and, you know, the idea that eventually your data and metadata are somewhere on a repository. If you think way back in the old days when we first met, we mentioned fair data points, and this is a technology that is also maturing in the background, and I think we are getting very close now to being able to have the technical details on how it is that your metadata, your machine actionable metadata that you create in the M4Ms will actually come to be exposed on a network of fair data points. And those are issues that we're not going to talk too much about today. But just so you know that, you know, the work you're doing now is leading to the point where these machine actionable metadata components will sort of be, you know, live to the world and available. And we can imagine this happening through a couple of different mechanisms. But one of the things about a fair data point, or at least some of the implementations we use, is that it's using this data catalog vocabulary, this DCAT.
DCAT,
and,
yes.
Yeah, and we borrowed heavily from this nice standard of DCAT for the fair data points and the data set metadata template as well.
Yeah, because DCAT it's heavily used by schema.org, and as some of you may know, Google has a specific search for data, and I think it's using heavily as well DCAT to detect the artifacts on web that it can be like searched through. But it's a very nice organization of data sets into those kind of levels. Nevertheless, so we're going to jump into the second, or actually the third presentation of today, and which actually are part of the really we are now going to the material of the workshop, and which is introduction to linked meta or data or metadata and machine actionability. This is quite short introduction to the concepts of the linked metadata and machine actionability. It is fairly non-technical and should provide an easy onboarding for the rest of the course. So basically, you're not required to know anything about programming, semantics, even fair data, or intrinsic and nerdy parts on how the web works. Therefore, it should be very useful to you. Actually, as you will notice, through the course, it's very practical, but in the sense it's built such that you don't need to know much more than actually opening a Google sheet and knowing basically to click and start some of the services. Of course, we hope that among you there will be somebody who is very into technical aspects of this whole work, so you can take over. And I'm very much motivated to learn you to catch the fish, so you can then do the work without actually needing us at all after the workshop and after the work we are doing this year. So let's jump into this presentation. Just to tell you, as you probably noticed in one of the previous talks that I gave earlier this year, I like to make my slides to be highly graphical. So we are going to use 3 characters in this workshop. One of them representing a machinic aspects of our workshop, which is 3M as we call it. And then we have human side of the workshop, which are represented through the characters of Robert and Anna. So you're going to use these 3 characters and dialogues between them to actually teach you how to do stuff. So we can then it's more playful, let's put it in that way, and less nerdy, I hope so. So link data. So this is the first topic of the day. And it is, as I said, like easy introduction to the concept of linked data. And I'm going to give you some basics, rather simple core principles of linked data. You might ask why linked data, why not fair data? But actually it's in its core, fair data is linked data, because that's what we are trying. We're trying to link things together and to present them and access to them in a very simple way, which is through the URLs and the links. So no hardcore technology, but the standard web technology that we all use every day. So some of you might know what the linked data are. Some of them you're hearing it for the first time. From Wikipedia, in computing, linked data is a structured data which is interlinked with other data, so it becomes more useful through the semantic queries. And this is this aspect of querying that you can ask those specific questions. Say, give me a data set that contains these variables, and we can ask a machine, and then it will return you back results. But actually, most of us are actually using linked data every day. Without even thinking about it. Large tech companies such as Google and Facebook are using linked data to boost our experience when you're using their platform. For example, Google has its own so-called Google Knowledge Graph, which enhances whenever we are doing search and requesting certain things, it uses semantic information that many of the websites actually encoded, so it gives us better results. Well, Facebook, even though it's not nice way of using it, but actually all those information that Facebook has about us and about friends are presented through this linked data of the graph database. So they're building knowledge about ourselves and our friends. And as we know from the recent elections in different countries, they are not using it in the good way. So you have also the bad side of the linked data as well. Nevertheless, just let's go quickly what the linked data really can help us today and what it practically mean. First of all, we can all agree that there is a large quantity of data on web. So there are tabular data represented by these graphics, then we have images, then we have videos, then we have binary data. But if they are as they are, if they're not on web or just like sitting somewhere, they are simply isolated. Let's say it's sitting on somebody's hard drive or USB stick. So it will be pretty much impossible to access to them or even make relationship and use them. So this is why, in this case, 3M is sleepy, because it cannot help us. It doesn't know about the existence of the data, so we cannot ask those semantic questions, say, give me certain tabular data, and so on. So it's in idling. The good thing is that when we introduce the concept of the website here, which is yet another form of data itself, the web was built with this idea of linking. So when you visit the website, you often find a lot of links within the same website, which might lead to the underlying data, such as those mentioned over here. With this mechanism, resolvable links or URLs, suddenly you have a simple way to navigate through the web and find data that you're interested in. And this is something that we can now wake up our 3M to help us, which is nice. It's just this simple mechanism, links that we are exposed every day. Wherever we see a link, we know what we need to do. We simply click and we go to another content. And it's really powerful, yet simple concept and approach on the web. So this is just like, instead of having graphical representation over here, we can actually build a graph. So website leads to images, tables, videos, and potentially binary data as well. So we now start again like investigating this concept of graph, and you will hear it a lot of time during today and in 2 days from now, because that's our base. Graph databases and how we interlink information. The graph approach is the way how we are building semantic artifacts. So let's look at the web. We have two websites, a website X and website Y. And the great thing about web and its underlying technology is that it's very easy to access data or make data available through those links and through exposing to the web. If you look at the website, what you see, it's like often it's using website, you can easily mix data from different sources. You can have images, you can have a text, you can have videos, and you can have links to another another websites, as I mentioned earlier. But let's make this more concrete. So which led more from something which is website X and website Y into saying that the left website represents a website describing an article, and this URL, it's as you might already heard this, it's GUPRI or globally unique persistent resolvable identifier. What does it mean? It means that there is only one of these identifiers that existing in the world, and if you put them in the browser, to put in simple words, it resolves, it gives you this website. And the same thing is for the, let's say, another one which represents a URL to the data. So let's call this awesome article, and this is awesome data. And the good thing is that we can put the links such that, let's say, inside of this awesome article, there is another link that leads to the awesome data. That awesome data was used to make the results of this article. The same thing we can do with awesome data link, that inside of that one, or specifically web page, there is a link that leads to the article that was using the data. So we create this nice semantic ring that we can explore. But the problem here is that it's only us humans who can explore it. We know to detect the links, and we can judge the quality and what will lead us to. But as it is now, let's say in this kind of form of the static web pages, machines can't do much. And that's where we want to help machines to help us and actually to spin this content into the form that then we can ask those kind of semantic questions, perform semantic queries, so machines can do all this tedious process of, let's say, clicking and finding the data that we need. And this is just a repetition of what I just said, that machines cannot detect where this link to awesome data really leads to awesome data themselves. And there is another thing is, like, as I mentioned earlier, unless we encode information such as subjects or variables, it's very hard for machine to figure out for what kind of purposes the data set can be used. And considering how much data we create, collect, and want to expose today, we really don't want to do this tedious process of finding the right data for us or whoever that is, like researcher trying to perform investigation. We want to use the machines, but to use machines to help us in this work, we really need to do work ourselves, because machines are not, even though we think they're clever, it's like a Terminator or whatever, but they're not. They're really operating very simple instructions, and it's up to us how we set them up to help us in a daily work. So as I said, like, we need here to help 3M to help us to do the work which is usually tedious and uncreative. So we want to put that burden on the machines. And what we want to do, and starting today, is to transition from the left side of the screen, which is we typically are accustomed to, which are static web pages, which have like static information which are only understandable by us humans, into the right side of this slide, which is representing exactly the same information, but in the form of graph. So also machines can make use of it. So you can see here we're turning the right side, which is static web page, into the same thing, but more into the graph representation, so machine can actually help us resolve questions that we have for. So here's just a simple way of doing it. So we have this awesome data as a group, as a link. And what we are going to do, what we are typically doing with describing the data set, with the metadata template, we are attaching certain properties such as title, who published the data set, license creator, and can be as rich as you want. And once we put them in this form, we can then do these semantic queries and ask machines to have to find this data or to get the specific information about the data set we are looking at. So how we are actually turning this static representation of static websites that we are usually accustomed to to something which is graph databases. And this is where this linked data as a concept help us. So we are using that approach as linked data approach, and then we are encoding metadata templates into a form called JSON-LD. And what are those two? As I mentioned, like I give you just briefly the idea of linked data. Here's more of a definition. As I said, linked data builds up on standard web technologies such as HTTP. So you really use those links. But rather than using them to serve web pages for human readers, it extends. So it's extension. So actually, those information can be automatically used by machines. And JSON-LD is a format in which this linked data approach can be encoded. It really builds on the JSON, which is a very popular format when it comes to building web applications, and this extension for linked data. So that's why we have this LD. So it's a lightweight format, and why its preferred way for encoding metadata is because you have a lot of web programmers who know how to use JSON, and for them JSON-LD, it's no difference. It's just like extension of a little bit with the header. It's a little bit extra information, which then turns the whole JSON into the more semantic artifact which JSON-LD represents, and it can be pushed on the unstructured databases such as Apache CouchDB or MongoDB, and MongoDB is very much used across the web. So you can find a lot of developers who knows this technology instead of going for technologies which are more esoteric, where you need to pay people more to develop, or you're missing developers and so on. So this is how you're going to build. So it's linked data as an approach and JSON-LD as a format, and this is something actually that is used as in the back end of Cedar Workbench. So you see here the representation. We are more aware of the tabular representation, but at the end of the day, when we build the tabular representation of metadata templates, at the end of the day, they are going to be stored into the graph format. And you can see here, title has title, and then you can add those information as a value. So it's all about these key value pairs that the JSON is based on, and how we are transitioning from something which is human readable, because you can see here now I have a properties which are strings, title, creator, license, and the same thing is for the values for those properties which are strings, and strings are not something that machines are very good at. So we want to turn this into the more machinic format, which is to replace basically all those properties which are strings into URLs. And how we are doing this, you can see this. Usually you do start with with the human in mind. So it's much easier for us to work this way, having the strings. But then eventually, let's look at the creator. Instead of having value Robert, we're going to replace it with Robert's ORCID IDs. And this is immediately you enable machine to retrieve additional information and go through ORCID, because actually when you hit the ORCID, if a machine hits the ORCID of this URL, it can get that JSON-LD or Turtle or RDF representation of the same resource that we usually view as a static web page. So we are going to slowly transition from something which is fully human readable and only human readable because it's a strings, into something that contains a lot of those links and replace them. Even though when you start editing, for you, it will look like it's a simple string, but in the background, there is a whole technological stack that will convert those information into the linked data. And this is just repetition. As I said, like in an example of ORCID ID, if humans approach this link through the web browser, they get a static web page. But if the machine accesses the same resource, same URL, it gets JSON-LD representation of the same resource. And here already those two, like think about what I showed you earlier this morning about DCAT. So HTML and JSON-LD are two different distributions of the same data set, which in this case, this data set is information about the user, or in this case, Robert. So they're still the same information, but differently organized and represented. And just repetition again, HTML are good for humans, but not for machines, where else like JSON-LD, or you will see for the vocabularies RDF or Turtle format are good for machines, and they can be easily navigated by the machine and extract more information. What is the best approach? Instead of building two different distribution of the same resources, that you build this JSON representation of the web page, And then you use a little bit of JavaScript to turn this to HTML. Of course, I don't expect that none of us are going to do this. We have the technology that is doing this for us. So Cedar is doing exactly that. It gets JSON-LD of a template or an instance of a template. Then you use a JavaScript to convert it into the HTML when we access it as a human. But then it still has this, we have still opportunity to access this JSON-LD representation of the resource. And this is how typically most of the dynamic websites work today. So they have all the information stored in the database, which up on a request are turned into the static web page that humans or basically us can explore. So as I said, like I just showing you again, that what we want is to turn those properties, which are strings, into those links, because then we have this global, unique, and persistent identifier representing the property that we can access as humans, but also machine can retrieve. And then many of those values, ideally, we want also to represent through the links as well. You can see here first, like as a first step, like we can replace the creator as the string with a persistent identifier of the Dublin core element called creator. And of course, when we are doing editing this into Cedar, you're just going to see the creator. You will not going to see this long URL because it is tedious to constantly like display these long URLs. But in the background, this is what is happening. So we are going to replace all of those with URLs, and then we will try to replace values, which are static strings, with the same concept of having links. So basically, at the end of the day, you have your semantic artifact, the instance of the metadata template, or representation of the term in the control vocabulary. You have nothing more but a collection of URLs that then machines can traverse through and get more information, and basically we can ask questions about. Somebody has a microphone switched on if he or she can switch it on.
There's also a great question by Jessica in the chat.
Yes.
And probably you cannot see the chat.
No.
Jessica, could you unmute and ask the question to Nicola?
Yeah, no, I was just curious. You said that you use JavaScript to convert the JSON-LD into HTML that humans can read. Is that what you're doing when you're creating the fair data point, at least as far as how a fair data point can be looked at by humans?
Yeah, that's right. Most likely there is of course it can be a specific framework that uses JavaScript, because JavaScript is a scripting language of the front end, which is the browser. So it's always JavaScript that is doing this, unless you do things already on backend, let's say with Python. But in 90% of cases, it's really JavaScript turning JSON-LD, because what you usually have is that you have API on the backend that is called by the front end, and it requests, hey, give me this JSON, and it gets the JSON, parse it, and prepares the website. So yes. Okay, I'll just continue. So here's what we're replacing. And so what is the advantage when we, instead of having a static property or string property represented as a string and value represented as a string, and turning this instead into the GUPRIs, is that suddenly you have URL representing landing on the awesome data, and then that one has a link to the creator, and that creator then indicates the value of your ORCID ID. So what happens is that machine can visit the metadata about awesome data on this URL, and further on infer through the this idea of linked data that awesome data has a creator, can read this, and then finally land on ORCID, which is again ORCID ID of that creator, which is again a URL, and then get more information. So it can actually jump and traverse through the same way we click, and go through the process of finding information on the web. Usually we'd end up on the going down to the rabbit hole and ordering stuff online, which is but in this case it's more about like ability to these links for the machines to traverse through and find this information. That's why it's we enable it by using these URLs instead of the static strings. So that's what we are doing. Like we're moving from something which is human readable, which is usually title and awesome data, to using a property which is again from the Dublin core elements called title, and then of course like some values cannot be URLs, but many of them hopefully we can turn them in URLs, and those URLs are basically the should land to the control terms or to ORCID ID or similar. So you can see here how we transition. Like title, we have a DC title, this URL. For creator, we again use something from the Dublin core. Then publication date, we have another property which is also resolvable from the, in this case, the GDMT ontology property called has dataset date. Then license, we use again Dublin core elements rights property, and you can see here creator, we insert the URL which is ORCID ID, which uniquely identifies a person. Date, we of course cannot put the link, but we can put date into a specific format that machine can understand. And then for rights, instead of using coded, short names of the rights, actually there is a control vocabulary of open source licenses, which is this spdx.org, which actually you can see here this CC by NC has also resolvable identifier that machine can read. It's like this, so we're turning all those information into machinic formats such that machine can traverse through, as I showed you in the previous slide. So that's at the end of the day, like for simplicity of representing information, awesome data has creator here. I just like concatenated instead of having these long URLs instead. But you can see that awesome data having a metadata can link to Robert through ORCID, and that is also in this case data about Robert, which can potentially have a link to affiliation, and then affiliation can have similar metadata. So you have those links just all over the place. And the great things about this is that you can store a graph about awesome data on one database. Then information about Robert is anyhow sitting on the ORCID database. And then Acme University can be on another database. So they don't need to be physically located in the same server. But through this idea of links, this approach of linked data, it doesn't matter, because we do that all the time. You're jumping from one website to another website, and those websites don't sit on the same web server, so they can be physically separated. And this is completely decentralized approach, but through the links we connect them. And it's like this simple idea, which is really, really great and help us in turning the fair data to create the fair data and to create much actionable data. And this is again just repetition of the same thing. So when we establish, when we put information instead of the static websites into graph databases, then we are basically what we're doing, we are enabling machines to traverse and help us in the work. So executing the semantic queries, finding us the right data sets, and so on. So that's basically what you see here as a web-based non-linked data that we are actually building through all these workshops from last year all the way to this year and so on. Questions before I jump to the second presentation?
Nicola, how
Yes,
does
Jeroen.
this, you are talking about properties and values. You often also see, besides linked data, the semantic data, where you have subject, predicate, object. Is that the same type of relation?
It is the same type. Just this, it really narrows down, because actually you have subject, object, predicate even here, because you will say awesome. I'm just going to go one of the slides here. Okay, so you have this subject, object, predicate because your subject is awesome data, has a creator, is a predicate, and then object will be Robert. So you see like 1, 2, 3. It's always 1, 2, 3 because you have those key value pairs or property value pairs attached to this specific thing, which is awesome data in this case. So it's always subject, object, predicate, but for simplicity, just because it's much easier to think into the key value pairs. Is that clear, Jeroen?
Yeah, so I want to make try to make clear that it's the same that that we're talking about.
It is, but now because we are like really narrowing down that we are talking about a specific thing that has a property and value attached to it, that's this triplet that you see happening over here. Any other question or need more clarification before we jump into the second presentation? Or actually third or fourth, I lost the track. Okay, I'm going to then jump into the introduction to the control vocabularies.
And while you're putting up the next screen, all the participants, Eric already mentioned in the chat that you have to reload the page of the common notes because it was for some reason blocked, and now it's open again. So then you can add at least your own name, your role, etc. So please do.
Okay, now I'm going to show you how we are going to use this technology when we are building control vocabularies. And at some point, just give me a nudge so we can have a break, because there will be a bit of presenting general concepts about control vocabularies. Then we are going to start looking at the tooling that we are going to use. And it's good that we make a break once when we are close, actually, just before actually we start talking more about the tooling. So let's imagine the two data sets. So I already introduced this idea about the graph. So we have awesome data 1 and awesome data 2. So awesome data has a creator Robert, and awesome data 2 has a creator Robert. So it's this triplet that subject predicate object that Jeroen highlighted, that I should like tell you. So awesome data 1 has a variable called WS speed, and awesome data 2 has variable WSP. And let's imagine that Anna wants to search for all the data sets that Robert made that contain a specific variable and to use a machine. So some portion of information is we already set up that the information, metadata about data are into this graph format, but now we want to execute the query so machine can help us find those data sets. So we are asking the help from 3M to help us basically to find data set that Robert made, which contain wind speed as a variable. And we pose these kind of questions. Of course, it will be in the specific format, not as a free text as you can see here. Machine will try to find those data sets that contain wind speed as a variable, and basically will say like, I can't find that because machine is not sure what those data set actually contains, and specifically what description of variables there are. So what we need to fix this situation, because to be frank with you, this is what I'm showing you now an example from my domain, which is wind energy, and people call wind speed different every time. Sometimes they call it WS speed, sometimes WSP, sometimes horizontal wind speed, and it's complete chaos. Even for me and my data sets, the way how I call the variable wind speed 5 years ago and today is probably different. And it's a not good practice, because even for myself, I cannot find my own data sets. So we need to fix this. And this is where actually we have Angry 3M asking Robert to do this work, to actually set it up in the proper way and to stick to the definitions of the variables and the naming of the variables, so it can help anybody in the work of finding the data. So the first step is, of course, as we discussed, like it's very typical that we just fix a string wind speed, and this, as I showed you previously, it's not the best way. It's a good starting point, but ideally wind speed should be replaced by the URL, and that's what the whole idea of building control vocabularies are about. So wind speed actually can be turned into, should have a global unique and persistent identifier, which is in this case a fake one, which is http://windspeed. And then to this thing, we then attach properties. In this case, to this thing is a term, and to the term we attach properties such as units, definition, and name, and we fix the name such as wind speed. We put the definition and we put the unit. This is just an example. You can put as many properties in the same fashion of building a metadata template to describe the data set. The same thing you can apply when you're building control vocabulary. When you're defining a term, you can have as many properties as you want, so you can as richly describe the term as you can do for any asset that you want to describe to this idea of semantic technologies and linked data. So you are constantly applying the same approaches that we are going to use today in control vocabularies, also metadata about data sets and metadata templates or anything else, because at the end of the day, it's kind of, I know it's like kind of describing itself, but that's how it is. So at the end of the day, instead of having wind speed as a string, we have actually persistent identifier, which is resolvable. And that's what, again, as I show you, machines can traverse through and get more information about. So now, so I just use, instead of the link, I put this logo for wind. Now we can ask a machine, hey, find us the data set that Robert made that has wind speed inside, because Robert, as you remember from the previous presentation, is represented as an ORCID ID that machine can retrieve. So now we can ask 3M to help us find the data set. And basically, this is close to how those semantic queries really look like. So give me a data set which there has variables is equal to example.com/windspeed and has creator is equals to orchid.org/Robert. And that machine can actually retrieve it. If you, of course, expose all this metadata online and make it accessible, you can return back and say, hey, check those two links. Again, we ask machine giving the query as links, and then we get the links back. So it's always links, just simply always links. That's the whole idea about linked data or fair data. Let's put it that way, putting into practice. It's a collection of links that are interconnected between each other. So now talking about vocabularies, why they should be fair. This is a nice paper that Barbara is one of the co-authors that you can find on this link. And why should vocabularies be fair? Why we are building those control vocabularies? Because we need to know if concepts in different data sets mean the same thing, which I showed you in the previous example. So we need to know that WSP and VSP are the same thing. So instead of calling them that way, we use one preferred label for those variables in this case. Because also we want to annotate the data using control vocabularies. So you want to put this information around about that you describe into metadata. We want to use vocabularies that are standard-based and that are machine actionable, so we can employ machines to do the work for us. And why we are building them is because by building control vocabulary, you're really strengthening your community and imposing the definitions. And there are many other reasons, which I'm not going to go through. It really helps. Especially one thing important for me as somebody who is developing a lot of tooling is that I can then build the tools and then make life of everybody else easier. And then the 10 simple rules. I don't want to go into details, but basically, as I said, this paper is a really good starting point if you want more deep dive into how to build control vocabularies and what are these rules that you should follow. And probably Barbara will already said some of them, and she will repeat again when we come to the IADOP workshop. But in the simplicity, now going through when we say about characteristics of the fair vocabularies, and we should represent them in terms of findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. Control vocabulary, which is fair, is indexed and registered in the community and or generic service. So today, when we build it, we are going to register it into Ontos text, so you can actually access it, but we will also going to register it in BioPortal. Accessible, that means that the URLs of the terms are resolvable. So when you hit the URL, you get something. So it's not just that you place some kind of PID, which doesn't mean anything. Accessibility really means that those term URLs are really resolvable. Interoperability. Yes.
Based on what you're now telling, Jessica put a question in the chat. She announced that she has to leave in a few minutes regarding those splits. So Jessica, could you unmute if you're still there?
Yep. No, I was just curious because we talk a lot about with the reason we have PIDs is because they need to be resolvable. A lot of URLs aren't permanently resolvable. So are the PIDs that you're using to for these variables for the vocabularies, does it need to be like minted like a DOI, or is it the fact that it's just hosted on some kind of service like BioPortal what makes it permanently resolvable?
What makes it resolvable? Exactly. So the service that we are going to use is that we are owning web domain, and we basically set up this onto stack to run to make it resolvable. So we don't need to like it's basically technology that will do this for you directly that we set up. And as we discuss, and as we go towards the September, we will set up this onto stack for potentially to run on ZONE-LD web server. So everybody can run this and mint their own PID. So it's not that you have to go to some organizations such as Dataset and then you pay €2 per DOI. This is, once you set this up on your own server, you're controlling minting and creation, actually resolvability aspect of the PID. Okay, I'll continue. I can see that she said thanks. Interoperable means that when we represent those control vocabularies, basically they're provided into the standard format, and that they are mapping, that there is a mapping and linking from our control vocabulary to any other control vocabulary. They have similar terms and so on. And then reusable aspects are that they're licensed, open license, and that they're maintained and so on. So how to build them? Thankfully, to build similar like I was showing you for metadata, for the control vocabularies, there is basically one way and one way only to do this properly. And there is one data model that we're using, which is RDF. The data model can be provided in the various formats, Turtle, JSON-LD, XML, and we can use SCOS or OWL, which are basically generic ontologies or generic control vocabularies, for which we are borrowing the properties to describe the described terms that we are defining our control vocabulary. But for simplicity, we are going to use Turtle format instead of JSON-LD for the control vocabularies, because it's typically used for the control vocabularies, and we are going to use SCOS. And what are those? RDF is a standard model for information inter-exchange on the web. Turtle is very common and human readable and rather compact data format to store RDF. And SCOS is short from Simple Knowledge Organization System, and it is a recommendation to be used when we are building treasuries, classification schemas, taxonomies, and basically any type of the structured control vocabulary. SCOS can cover, I think, more than 90% of the control vocabulary that you're building. If you need really in-depth information and relations and much more semantic representation of the control vocabulary, then OWL, which states from web ontology language, is another choice, which gives you this much more detail. But actually, it's rather complicated. It's not so easy. I use it a few times, and honestly, SCOS can really cover most of the work that I'm doing. Like I rarely have need for something more than SCOS. That's why we are selecting RDF, Turtle, and SCOS for this workshop. So just to show you how this is encoded, the WinSpeed, and some of you already seen this. This is actually resolvable PID for WinSpeed, and it is hosted and provided by the Wind Energy Department of DTU. So if you go to this link, you will get the representation of the WinSpeed. So to this PID, we attach properties such as prefer label, and then we have this SCOS pref label as one of the key properties from the SCOS vocabulary that we use to define WinSpeed, and we put this case value for this property called WinSpeed. Then we can add alternative labels such as WS, or what you see previously in the slide, WSP or whatever. We provide the definition. Then in case that this term exists in another vocabulary, we use property called exact match. And in case of the WinSpeed, WinSpeed exists in another vocabulary, which is from the marine technology. And this is the link or the PID of that same term in another control vocabulary, because usually you're going to reuse terms from another control vocabulary to build your own. This is a typical process, like similar way when we're building the software. We're borrowing libraries that already exist, mix them and mesh them to suit our needs. It's the same process with the control vocabularies. And you can impose some kind of hierarchical organization of the control vocabulary. For example, in wind energy, we have things about the atmosphere, but at the same time, we have terms which are representing actual wind turbine as a machine. So I like to organize it hierarchically. So wind speed has a parent term, which is atmospheric parameters, and that one has to be defined as well. So then we have this nice hierarchy and put inside the control vocabulary. So basically, once you put the hierarchy in your control vocabulary, your actually control vocabulary becomes taxonomy. But that's okay, it doesn't matter. It's all of them are control vocabularies. And then, as I said, like SCOS has a limited number of properties that you can use to describe your term, and you can extend it. There is no, you're not forced to use only SCOS. You can put other properties, as I say, you can describe your term as rich as you want. The same way like GDMT has 100 and something fields. I mean, you can go crazy and have like as many as you want, but you need to have a number of those which are really base, which is pref label and definition. Those two must be there like all the time, to be honest. And as you can see here, this is a graphical representation of the term wind speed, and it's what represents a knowledge graph, because what we are doing, we are encoding information, the knowledge about the wind speed through key value pairs to this persistent identifier. So that knowledge graph that you see here as a graphical representation of this term is then switched into the actual representation which sits inside of the graph database, which is turtle format. And don't worry, like you don't need to know anything about it, because we have a tooling that will convert Google Sheet template that you're going to work on into this representation. But this is what happens then at the end of the process when we do all this through the Google Sheet, which is very easy to navigate through. That at the end of the pipeline, you have turtle representation of that same term of the whole control vocabulary, which is then accessible by the machine. So before, I think this is a good moment to have questions, and then to have then a 10 or 15-minute break. Is there any questions?
Renata, you have a question.
Yeah, I had a question. Where do you put wind speed can be measured in miles or kilometers per hour? I think, where do you put those different metric systems so that when we put a variable in, that we are talking about the same speed?
So what you can do is like, that's a good question. So this is where we need to extend SCOS, because SCOS doesn't have anything to tell you about the unit. So you will create a property metric unit, and you will create a property imperial unit. And then in those properties, you will put specific values, like, as you said, like for metric unit will be meters per second. Imperial unit will be whatever it is, miles per hour or whatever. But there should be always the same way, like we have a preferred label for the term, which is wind speed. You can have this, that's what we are doing, for example, at my department. We have a property called preferred unit, and we specifically state meters per second. And then we have alternative unit, which could be miles per hour. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So we need to when we are building the labels, we need to create those different types.
Yeah, we can. That's right. We can extend. We can add those properties. So you put this richness of information. Exactly what you said. Like if you say, but it should be like agreed in the community that the same way you're agreeing, like it should be called this way. That the preferred unit, when I get the data, mostly I will expect that in case of the wind speed, I expect that the wind speed is provided to me in the meters per second.
Okay. Yeah.
And to repeat what Jessica was mentioning, exactly, Jessica, instead of creating your own property, as you will see through this template on the vocabulary, we can import property. If there is already existing property about units from another vocabulary, we're just going to import it inside of the template and reuse that one instead of creating our own new property or they're existing. So that's correct.
Yeah.
What Jessica put as a comment.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Nicola, just following up on that. So if you, so what capability would there be at the query level for maybe resolving different units of measure on different data sets? Is it possible then, when you have many data sets, some in British units, some in metric units, that one query could just bring back some kind of uniform representation of all those measurements?
So what you can ask then, because they're all links, so you can say, find me data sets which has a variable, in this case, give me data sets which has a variable wind speed, and that variable wind speed is provided in meters per second. So you can execute that query. If everything is put right in the right way, if it's like really all of those are semantic artifacts and links, you can then ask those questions. And it will go through and find you those and return back the results.
But will there then be a property which does the conversion, right? So if your variable is listed in meters per second, while in the United States they use mile per second, then it needs to be,
converted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then it's more about how the service is built, how this search portal is developed,
Okay.
or how on their end, when they are providing resolvable wind speed as a term, they provide this option to switch it from imperial to the metric representation. So it is more about on the developer side that allows that kind of conversion to take place. And I can see, I agree, but I see a few challenges, especially in social science. Everything about defining the term, I mean, like technology, you will see it works. We start putting things, of course, there are then hiccups, things are breaking, and then as usual they do. And it's a challenge because we have a human in the equation, and everybody has an opinion how things should be called and what should be a definition. Trust me, I had a colleague, I gave a similar course to my colleagues. We start to define control vocabulary of parameters used in a software that we are providing and selling to the DTU, and immediately erupted because they said, like, should we define these terms by methodological conventions or engineering convention or another convention? And it's all about trying to really squeeze the space which you operate. So you say, like, I'm tuning this for a specific purpose, because then you can really avoid many of those challenges, but still there will be discussion and opinions, and somebody needs to be, that's something that Eric will touch at the end of the day. And then there will be another workshop when it's about governments, who is making the decision. And as you will probably realize by now, when you define control vocabulary and control, nobody is fully happy how it is, but it's kind of acceptable. As long as acceptable, you're in the good condition. So I would say that. Any other question before we take a break?
Maybe just one punctuation mark there, Nicola, is the vocabularies is sort of like one long ongoing negotiation.
Indeed.
And contract. It's everybody trying to come up with some agreements that work for them, but then also allow them to connect with others. And that's just an ongoing, I think so long as there's people, there will be this need to recreate and maintain vocabularies into the future.
True. And you, as a community, you need to agree what is your preferred, in this case, label. And any other label or any other unit will find its place in say alternative label or alternative. So nobody will be kind of removed from the picture. And I will show you, if you're interested, I will show you how we tackle this with control vocabulary of parameters wind energy, because we had to fuse 5 different standards, so everybody would be happy. So if they blend there, they can see also definition in other standards and so on. Anyways, but I think it's good time to take a. Let's go for 15 minutes. So let's go back at 10 o'clock. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, because then you're really jumping into the practical aspect. We're not going to build a control vocabulary, and you will start to interact with the Google Sheet document, and that's the major part, the second part of today's workshop.
Great, thanks, Nicola. See you everybody at 10 o'clock. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a good coffee break there. And I wanted to just once again kind of thank everybody for the dedication in showing up to these workshops, because I know they're not easy and I know you're busy. And, you know, we mentioned before from the very beginning that this whole metadata for machine workshop endeavor is really kind of like building an airplane while we fly it. And so what we can already see though is that the next iteration of these workshops in other ZoneMV programs is already being consolidated and streamlined. And over time, your pioneering efforts are going to be made much more efficient for others to do these things. And if it all works out, we can imagine a way of doing business at ZoneMV that's much more inherently fair right from the beginning. And that could have some really nice benefits for everybody. So thanks again for all the effort and dedication here. Nicola, would you like to start up again? I'll let you have the screen back.
Thank you. Okay, so so now we are actually jumping into the practical work. So the second half of today is really, we are going deep dive and start to build the control vocabulary of subjects. So I'm just going to present you here an effective pipeline for generating, publishing vocab. So basically, you don't need to know anything about RDF and Turtle and so on. Things are already pre-configured for you and made easy. All you need to know or to have is a Google account, so you can access Google Sheet. We are going to define control vocabularies. And this is this vocab template, as you can see here. What is happening afterwards, we're going to trigger a certain process called Sheets to RDF, which sits and runs on GitHub. And Sheets to RDF is, as you can call it, automatic workflow, which executes a number of Java, Shell, and Python scripts, which will convert that Google template that you filled into RDF, or specifically Turtle file, which is scos Turtle vocabulary. It will perform testing. It will test whether that vocabulary is good or not. And it will commit all the results to the GitHub, so you can always see them, what happens, like who triggered the pipeline and what are the results. You can always go back and forth, back in the past if you're not happy with it. And as part of it, we're also going to push that Turtle file to OntoStack, so those identifiers of terms are actually resolvable. And at the end of the day, if there's enough time, we will configure BioPortal to directly read that Turtle file. So whenever you're updating control vocabulary, the latest version of the control vocabulary will be shown on OntoStack, so that it will show the latest information. But also BioPortal every night will check whether you generated a new version of the control vocabulary, so you can fetch it, index it, and make it available for you inside of the CEDAR, to be specific. So basically, all you need to have is a Google account, and most of you will be good if they have a GitHub account, and that's why you were filling in that CEDAR template form. So I was able to get information about you, about your Google account and about your GitHub account, so I can allow you the access to the Google Sheet document. And specifically, it's necessary that you have one of you to have a GitHub account, so you can trigger these sheets to RDF. There's a very simple button. But since we are not that many, and I know that not everybody actually filled in the CEDAR template when you report in Google account, I will make the template during today's workshop open so everybody can access and start modifying. But let's jump into I will going to show you how this template really looks like. This template there will be some, unfortunately, I couldn't make this as graphical as I would like to. So there is quite a bit of text. So pay a bit of attention with what's going on. Anyhow, any questions that will arise, we can tackle them during the actual, when we start filling in the template. And you're going to explore it together with me. So we are not a big group, which is nice. So we can all turn on microphones and discuss as we go through the exercise. This is how it looks like. Don't try to figure out the details for time being what are inside of the template, but this is how it looks like. And this is we are going to fill in specifically for subjects. It has 3 parts. It has this general setup of the template, of the vocabulary. Then you see, I'm repeating the same thing that I started earlier this morning. Then you're giving a metadata, so you're describing that for control vocabulary. So this idea of metadata and control terms, it's just revolving over and over again. It's constantly there. So there is this part of the template where you're describing the metadata that describes the control vocabulary. And then finally, we have this third part in which we're actually defining terms of the control vocabulary. For example, what I showed you is the wind speed. And optionally, if we are missing properties, if we cannot find properties in another vocabularies, we might define also properties to describe the term. So these are these 3 parts. So general setup, control vocabulary, metadata, and definition of terms, and optionally properties of the control vocabulary. So again, three things to fill in and 3 things to pay attention on. So let's go with the general setup. So there are 2 things here. First, we need to define what's in terms of SCOS defined as a concept schema URI. So what that is, that's basically a base URL of your control vocabulary to which we will attach all those terms. So it's kind of an umbrella. And this is necessary so because all of the terms will be linked to that specific URL. Afterwards, after this concept schema URI, which ideally, as I said, we are controlling this. It's basically URL. It's a domain that web domain that you control that can be resolvable. And in this case, we have for the exercise, we have that one put in place for you. Then we have what we're doing here is that, as you notice, it can become very tedious and unreadable if you're putting this long URL every time we are inserting the property or defining the term or putting the value and so on. That's why we are defining these prefixes as they're called. These are basically short names, which when you trigger Sheets to RDF automatic pipeline, every time Sheets to RDF sees, for example, PAV, it will replace it with this long URL. So it just help us being much easier to fill in things and much more readable for us when we are doing this work. So just to give you an idea what we have here. So we are here importing, basically, if your program is basically like an import, we are importing control vocabulary, which are more kind of generic. And these are the standard one that we often use. So of course you have a SCOS, and this is this concept URI of that SCOS. So it's the same thing we have here, but SCOS has something different. It's called HTTP W3. I'm not going to read you the whole URL. So we have a SCOS, which, as I showed you already, stands for Simple Knowledge Organization System. It's generic control vocabulary. Then we have XSD, which is XML schema definition. It is used to define certain types, such as integer, float, date, and so on. Then we might borrow some of the properties from OWL. You can see now we are actually mixing a little bit with OWL because we're missing some of the properties. We might miss some of the properties. Then we are importing as well doubling core terms. And I will show you later on which specific property from this control vocabulary we're going to use. And then we have POV, which states from provenance, author, and versioning. It is a control vocabulary of basically ontology that contains certain properties that we will use to describe our control terms and control vocabulary itself. And then finally, also for our own sake, we are putting a short name for our own control vocabulary, which will be probably something like zone-LD subject, and then we'll put concept URIs. You just basically copy the same thing here over there, because then it's very nice and readable. As I said, prefixes are turned into URL by concatenating to URL associated with the prefix, and this is all done for you. So you don't need to think about it. It's just more about like making things more readable and easier to work with. So this is the first part, the general setup of the control vocabulary. Now, if we go inside of the meta, the second layer, which is the metadata that are describing the control vocabulary itself, these are the properties that we are using. You can see that we are already started using those prefixes. So we are using prefix DCT, and from that vocabulary, we are using property called title. Then we're using property called description, creator rights, and then from path we are using version, created on, and last update on. So these are all properties that are belonging to these two specific, these two generic control vocabularies. So DC title, basically, this is where you're putting the title of the vocabulary. Then we can repeat as many rows of creator as there are in the workshop. And for the creator, we'll put your ORCID IDs. That's why I was asking to report ORCID ID, because then you can insert your ORCID IDs in the list. And then you basically, as you saw in the previous representation, we can make machine actionable retrieval of creators. And here rights, where we are going to put license under which we are issuing the whole control vocabulary. For time being, I have put it to the CC0, so open access, no attribution. You can change it, and we can explore what kind of licenses you can use. Then version of the control vocabulary, and you will see it's typically in the form of major.minor change.bugfix. It's the principle that are typically used also when you're doing the software development. And this is critical that we maintain this value, because every time you update, we need to change one of those three values, because then also when BioPortal is going to read the latest version of the control vocabulary, it will detect this specific field and put the right label inside the BioPortal when you access it. Created on, it is initial date of the vocabulary creation in ISO 8601 format, included with time zone. So created on, we are going to update it with today's dates. Let's say we put a fellow clock or whatever we decide on, and then every time that you update the vocabulary, you're going to change this field. So this one stays fixed, created on, because this is this initial creation date. So that's this second layer inside of the template. Just going to start to check here so I can see if there are any questions here. As I said, like every time you update your control vocabulary, we need to update path last updated on, and to update the version. So we have these three digits basically, which represents small modification, minor and major. Small, minor, major modifications up to the side, but we can say, let's say small changes such as spelling corrections, we change the last digit. Minor if we basically adding new terms, and major could be if you are, for example, rearranging the hierarchy, deprecating the terms, and similar. But it is really something that it's up to you to decide. It's just the suggestions, and probably we can tackle this even more during the workshop about the governments. So it's up to somebody who's going to lead further the development and maintenance of the vocabulary, how he or she will tackle these challenges. But just this is a potential suggestion how you can maintain the version value. And now we are jumping.
Nicholas, yes? Maybe I could just mention that I could imagine, not for now, but for later, the governance group could even make the versioning schema more semantic as well.
They can. Yeah.
So if you saw a 0.1 update or 0.2 update, even the machine would have a better understanding of what kind of versioning was happening there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely. And funny enough, for those who are using GitLab or GitHub, when you create a version of the software, this versioning with the 01 with these 3 digits, it's actually called semantic versioning, even though it doesn't have anything to do with the machine actionability. But it is exactly what you said, because machines, like if GitHub or GitLab is encoded properly, if you configure properly, it automatically change the version based on when you say release process, and it knows that it's a major, so it's just going to increase the number over here. So it knows that these, and what I'm showing you here, actually in this previous slide, like, let me find, where was that? Exactly here. This is the semantic that is kind of used in the software development. They know that it's a major change, it's like a big change of the software. So they know, the computers know that it's this number they're looking at. If it's a minor, it's here, and the last digit is bug fix, like a small bugs that are appearing in the software. But you can use the same philosophy for the control vocabulary, tune it as needed. And as you said, Eric, governance group can come up with the rules of engagement, how actually this is done. And it's a nice document to have, because then you don't need to think too much when you onboard anybody, or for example, if you don't want to maintain anymore, but you get that admin to somebody else. So there are some possibilities, definitely.
Yeah.
So now we're jumping into the the meat part of the control vocabularies, the very defined terms. Just to let you know, I set up this Google Sheet such that this identifier row is automatically generated. And it is generated by looking at the value that are in preferred label, and then it creates this this part that is missing here that you don't see here. Column identifier, as you can see here, is that, as it says here, is automatically generated. And since identifier eventually is turned into URL, it is critical that the preferred label in English contains only characters, and this is like specific US ASCII. It's a limited set of US ASCII, which is either digits, letters, and some of the special characters, because otherwise, if you put some strange characters, it will not be a resolvable URL. And I'm going to show you very soon how it looks like. Alternatively, if you really want to have some preferred labels, which contain characters beyond this set of characters, then the identifier column needs to be manually edited, so to make it resolvable. And I'm going to show you an example what really this means. Let's say in Denmark there are letters which doesn't belong to this set, such as this special letter O. If somebody wants to use label Aarhus, this will be eventually turned into this kind of URL, and this is not resolvable, it's not functional. So it's critical that this O is replaced with something which machine can resolve. And typically in Denmark, what they do, they put AA. Or alternatively, you can keep special character in the pref label by make sure that this automatically generated identifier is manually tuned. So we make sure that it has the characters that can turn into eventually into URL that is resolvable.
Nicola?
Yes.
Are there not international, especially in XML, this coding scheme is also, let's say, prevalent, how do you call it? Mandatory. Mm-hmm. Should it not be following that? So within XML, these kind of character sets are also specifically, let's call it escaped or introduced.
Escape, I remove. Of course, I mean, like I can extend function. I can try to make a script which is embedded inside of the Google Sheet, so it does that conversion and replacement of.
Let's look. Let's take it offline. Yeah, let's look.
Yes. But please mark it down. It's a good idea. It's a good idea, you know. And just to going forward, the pref label, what you might notice is that I have this at something, and that is basically language tag. Because it indicates in what language the preferred label is given. What is important to know is that for any given language tag, you can have only one pref label, but you can have as many language tags. You can have multiple. You can have pref label in multiple languages, no problem at all. And I already set it up the template such that you have also a column of pref label in Dutch if you want to put in this case. Subject term in Dutch as well. And you can look at this, there is this list of language tags represented as the 2 letters on this website. So just one more time to repeat. So you can have only one preferred label, but it can be provided in multiple languages. On the other hand, you can have as many alter labels as you want. And there is, there is no need to put any kind of language tag. You can, but actually it's much easier if you don't. And the way how you can put all of the potential alternative labels is that you just separate them by comma. Of course, if you want different separator, we just need to change the separator comma into whatever you prefer. So that's the idea. And SCO's definition is very similar in the sense of configuration like perf label. You can have one definition, but in a similar way, like in multiple languages. And similarly, to the pref label, I have set up the template such that you can put the definition in English and definition in Dutch, and you will see how I did it. So you can repeat if you want to put the definition for another language like Portuguese, Danish, Serbian, whatever. So it's the same approach. And then this goes broader. Is used to express hierarchy in your control vocabulary. Like I showed to you, wind speed has a parent class. Let's call it that way, which is atmospheric variable. So in that case, if I was defining wind speed, I will put here atmospheric parameters. Similarly, when we go through the subjects and terms that you have, initially you might want to have a flat list without the hierarchy, and then you will start seeing the patterns and some terms that belong to certain parent class, and then you will start defining also those higher level parent classes of the terms. So that's what the SCO's broader is used to. And actually, term itself can belong to multiple parent classes. It's not for that it's like only one under one parent class, and that's why you have this separator comment. What you actually put here is a URL of the parent class, and you will see everything this in an example. So I know it might be confusing now. I guess it is, but it will be very, very clear when I show it to you very soon in an example. And there are other columns which you will encounter, like DCT source, close match, exact match, replace by, and so on. You can add as many columns as you want because those columns will represent properties. You're not forced to fill in all of them. If you leave empty column, it simply will not take it into account. If you put anything inside of the cell of that under the specific term and column, then it will use it. Probably one that you're going to use quite a lot is this double import term source, because you're probably going to borrow definition of the terms from, say, Wikipedia or some journal article. In that sense, you're just going to put the link to the source from which you took the definition. Let's say that. Now I'm going to show you how this is populated in case of the wind speed that I showed to you earlier. So we had this wind speed term that we were defining. So first, I set up the concept URI schema, which is this long URL, which is basically wind energy parameters. So it's kind of umbrella I was mentioning to you. Instead of constantly writing this URL, I just put the prefix WEP, and this WEP will be using Shih-Tzu RDF always replaced with this long URL. And then I put, of course, the same prefixes you show already. I put the title, which is wind energy parameters. I put a description of this control vocabulary. I put creator, because in this case, I didn't put the ORCID, but actually I use ROR ID of the Danish Technical University. This is also resolvable. I put the rights and some information about the version, date of the creation, last update. As I said to you, my wind speed has a parent class, which is atmospheric parameter. So what I did is that I first defined atmospheric parameter. I put this preferred label, such as this, and the Google Sheet immediately created this identifier. So basically added to WEP atmospheric parameters, it removed space. So we can put those kind of operations, so we can concatenate or remove or replace it. There are these letters which are beyond the standards for URLs. I didn't put any alternative label. I put a definition of this parent class, parent concept to be specific, and because it's parent, it doesn't have any broader. So it's basically top concept, as it's called inside of SCOS. And then I define the wind speed. I use this preferred label. I have alternative label. I define it as such. And you can see here, what I inserted to impose hierarchy is that I inserted the Cupri PID of atmospheric parameter, which is WEP 2 dots atmospheric parameters. And finally, because the same term exists in another vocabulary, which is not mine, I put PID of the same term in another vocabulary, which is this long URL over here, which is marine technology vocabulary. I think John made many years ago. So this is the process. So how we are actually putting those information out of the Google Sheet. So how we are defining things. Before I put you the link to the control vocabulary that you're going to build, maybe it's good that you, if you have any questions that I answer them now before we jump into the work of filling in the template.
Nicola,
Yes.
if I understand correctly, then the identifier column, so the orange column to the far
Here.
That will be, I guess, auto-completed in a way by the spreadsheet.
Yes.
So I'm not typing in there. It's the machine is doing that for us.
Exactly. Unless you want to use a special character, which are beyond beyond this set of characters. In that case, we need to manually edit that one. But you will see when you fill in terms, it will automatically pop up and start building. So we start basically by inserting preferred labels over here and start definition. And the good thing is that you already did some work with Barbara. So we have two sources with a list of terms that can be used for subjects that Eric, if you don't mind, you can just post it already inside of the chat window.
Yeah.
And while I'm switching, while I'm preparing the link to the template that you're going to start filling in.
Sure. So this was a list of subjects that Barbara was going through her notes from the previous work. And I just put that in the chat window. And is there, I think, good examples of the kinds of, data set subjects you may consider. And I'll even put a link to the Google Sheet in there as well, where I have that.
I'm just going to share the screen so you can see. So this is the template. I'm just going to post the link to the template now in the chat, just below the Eric ones. They're the one that Eric sent. Feel free to click on the link so you can go to the template and we can then explore it. Let's say explore it for 5 minutes, and then we can start actually defining terms, moving some of the terms that Eric posted that we already built in the previous workshop. I think they're related to the project content template, so you can reuse it over here. But you can see that just quickly that I already. So this is fully functional URL. So if I jump to that one, it will have this. There is only one term that I define. It's like a parent class called deprecated. So in case that you're at some point are removing some of the terms. So if I go to this link, it's supposed to. Yeah, here it is. So, we put the right. You see, for some reason doesn't. Now it's okay. So then we'll go ahead. So if I go to this one and I click, you can see now all that information that are currently in the template are now represented inside of the ontology viewer, which is part of the onto stack. So you have title of the control vocabulary. Currently you have one term which is deprecated. So if I click on that one, it has definition, has a URI. So this URI is minted for you, so it is fully activated. So if I click on that one, it will of course resolve on this one. And this is what we see as a humans. But you can see here down there, you have this this representation of that resource, but in the machinic format, JSON-LD turtle and RDF XML. So I'm going back to the template. So I already preset for you a short name of this long URL, which is on MV subjects, and then I have this basic control vocabularies, which are typically used to build our own stuff. Okay, you can see there are some chats, and then as I said to you, I put some of the preferred label and title. Actually, this is surplus, but these two are no need. It's enough to have a DC type. I'm just going to delete this row, and you can see how it looks like because as I said to you, I put. So if I just to demonstrate to this auto population of the identifier, I'm just going to take one of the term that Eric posted. So animal-free innovations. Let's put it that one. So if I copy paste that information here, you can see that it automatically creates identifier. It removes spaces because spaces are turned into a strange set of characters when they're reproduces the URL, and you see it's automatically making identifier for you. Diagnosis of infections, and let's say ethical issues. If I put ethical issues here, if I capitalize this one, it automatically creates, because there is this long formula which substitutes things such as spaces, slashes, and so on. So that's done for you. So if I delete, of course, it disappears. So what will be a good starting point is that all of you who are creating you're going to do this exercise. Let's insert your ORCID IDs here. So just like, let that be a first exercise. Put your ORCID ID here. So it has to be this entire http orchid.org/. So, and then just simply copy paste this row as many times as you're entering your information. Let's start with that one. Let's start with that before we start putting the terms, preferred labels, and the definition of those preferred labels.
So Nicola, should I begin with the creator then? For example, putting my ORCID in there.
You can put your ORCID there, your own as well, and then other participants of the M4M should do the same thing. So
yeah.
So we get.
And I'm going to put in everything, the HTTP part. And
that's
everything.
right. Put the whole HTTP part.
Yeah.
Because actually, your ORCID ID is that whole thing. It's not just those last part. It's the whole thing. That's your ORCID ID.
Yeah. And I think everybody has editing rights.
Everybody has editing rights. Please let me know if you cannot edit. I'm just going to move things a little bit so there is enough.
Yeah, maybe insert the prefix.
I'll insert the prefixes. So people just the participants should just need to insert their yes.
Yeah, creator or contributor, and that could also be. Yeah.
For simplicity, we just put them as a creator. So
yeah.
Then we can, when we come to the governments, when we then workshop, then we can have more in-depth discussion. Who is the creator? Who is the contributor? And how to indicate who is who. And what I noticed that I'm missing, just going to stop share screen. User license.
And Nikolai, just for my understanding, there's a hand. Eduard is raising his hand. Eduard?
Yes.
Of Edward?
Yes. Hi.
Hi, hi.
Just a simple question. I
Sure.
cannot paste anything in the cell. Is that
Really?
Then it's blocked by another. So then go to another cell.
We'll go to another cell, yeah.
So,
Okay,
if
so-
all participants just pick a single line, then
No,
we
I
can all
have the
edit
same
it.
problem, and mine says view only. I don't have any.
okay.
Then
I
you have
cannot
to
edit
refresh.
it.
Refresh the document. Refresh it because the edit rights have been released recently.
Okay, I'm trying it again.
Is it working for you, Eduard?
No, it's still a view
No.
only. So
Doesn't work for me either.
should I request?
It is everyone with the link has edit rights.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that means that either you need to click on the link again, or you need to
Yeah.
refresh the page. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Try now. Try to refresh. It should be.
Fine.
Okay, great, great.
Yeah. Okay.
We are now testing a little bit where Google can handle us. So
Okay.
do we need more clearer rows? I'm just going to insert.
And what sometimes happens, if you're working inside a hospital, for example, or CVS, then your link will be replaced with a malware prefix. So for example, if you go to the line, if you share your screen, Nikolai, or I can do it as well. If you go to line 12, and that's something, and then look at the URL, click on it, and you get a pop-up, and then you see that it is a Eurosave link.
Yeah.
So that means that your firewall is inserting a malware protection. Please be aware of the fact that it needs to be
good point.
removed. It's inside, so you need to edit it. So it looks like it's okay, but there is a prefix in front.
Interesting. I haven't.
That's a firewall setting. So that means the Eurosave link is a firewall implementation.
Did you show us an example from your ORCID, Jeroen?
My ORCID is in the second line, so that works.
Okay. How did you find this Euro?
That's I know from because I work in let's say WIT and for many university medical centers, and they implement firewalls,
Yeah.
which is a commercial solution just used by all. And this is to prevent links. So it's if you click on the link, it first goes to that, let's call it Outlook or Exchange server, which checks it, and if it's not listed, then it's blocked.
But you were just kind of randomly scanning through here and found it?
Yeah, I know that this will happen.
Yeah.
For example,
here
I
it
know
is,
that there are
yeah.
some colleagues from my own university, and they, I know they
I'm
at
just-
least will have the problem.
So if I for the time being remove this one and copy paste again,
Yeah, then it's okay.
then it's okay. Otherwise, what I can do is to quickly like copy paste all the rows, put them in text editor, and remove.
Oh,
them
yeah,
and-
sure,
and-
sure, sure.
And slam it back.
But in
a
the end,
good
it will
point.
work, right? So it's funny, it still works. Also, the machines will work.
It again. So your own.
I will show you. I will edit this one.
I will let you. Do you want to share the screen? Your own.
I will share my screen.
Yeah, I'm just going to stop.
Where's my screen? Let's only do the tab, right? Yeah.
And I don't know, Nicola, if you face these firewall issues in the wind energy domain.
No, not so far. But it's good that your own spotted. That's you always learn something new.
Yes.
Euro01 save link.
So what you need to do is you edit this one. You click here, link, edit link. And there you see that there is a reserved term.
Oh my
So what you
God.
then do is you only do this. You copy paste it again in this one. You see it's an enormous link. And then it's okay.
But what I think will happen with the sheets to RDF, sheets to RDF are not pulling this. It just takes the textual content of the cell. So I think we'll be still safe.
It's safe, but people should be aware that the URL is different than they might expect.
Sure.
So if your system checks for escaping sequence or whatever, or hashes, then that will be replaced, and then the link doesn't work.
Good. Okay. Did everybody put their?
So you can see if it works if you just hover over the orchids, then orchid should appear, and if no orchid appears, then you know something is wrong with your URL. Like this one also doesn't work.
Yeah, that one is that's right. Redirecting.
So this is
no, but it does resolve. Was Chantal Visor? I sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly, Chantal. But it does if you click on that link. On that one, click.
Yeah, it works. Yeah,
it works. Yeah.
It's funny that it isn't automatically resolved.
It cannot fetch the data.
Oh, it might be that it is a private one.
But if you click, then it actually resolves.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but probably you're right. You get this. I think you have this option when you configure your ORCID, is that not allow access by third-party apps, such as in this case Google Drive is. Okay, so what I'm going to do while you're exploring this Google Sheet, I'm just going to clean it up because there are some empty DCT creators which are not inserted. So I'm just going to remove, assuming that everybody have inserted their ORCID ID. Yes. Okay. So I'm just going to pick some of you because that's the easiest way instead of asking who wants to do something. Edward, can I ask you for a favor? Can you edit this created on field and put the current date in this form? You can see what you need to change. So it's a year, month, date, then time in UTC. So you need to remove, if I remember correctly, 2 hours from what it is now. So UTC 0.
June 1. Oh, sorry. And then what did it have to do with the hours? 2
hours is like whatever the hour is now, on the time is now, you just remove 2 hours because what you're representing this +00, that means it's UTC 0 time zone. It's really Greenwich, no daylight saving, because that's typically what she's preferred way of putting for time.
Like this?
Yeah, that's correct. Great. And then later on, once we are towards the end of the exercise, we are going to update this row 24 and otherwise somebody else. So so what we are going to do now, I want everybody to look at that Google Sheet that Eric shared with us. Yes.
Can I ask one question about
yes,
this? So so here we are using a Google Sheet. So I can imagine that we have to do it manually, but in Setter, for example, I imagine this also can be solved automatically because it's a bit tedious to fill in the date and time all the time.
No, you're right. Yeah, we could do that, and I can of course definitely like improve that to have this that works like automatically whenever you trigger the update that on the sheets to RDF will replace this value. But for time being, just like it is manual. But you're right. But listen, everything that we are doing, we are moving towards being fully machinic. So that's why we are building control vocabularies, so you don't write terms in the when you instantiate the template. And you will see, like on day 2, there will be a number of fields that will remove thankfully to the existence of the control vocabulary. But it is stepwise process. Jeroen, if you can mark that as well, it's a good idea to do and to improve this workflow. So that will be very helpful. So what we are going to do now, I'm just going to trigger, just to show to you this link that was it here, potential subjects. So this is something that Barbara prepared for us, and it is related to the work that you already did in the previous workshop. So if you find, and we can start using these terms if you agree. So this is up very much to your decision whether these terms can be used as a subjects in this in the control terminology that we're building now. So maybe you can start, everybody can figure out which of the terms they find useful and start copying pasting those inside of the column called preferred label. So I did inserted one of them. So maybe that could be that should be our next step. Unless there is, and then please start feel free to stop me, switch on your microphones and ask me questions as we are going through this process. But that's the second step. Now we are going to actually start putting the, filling in the preferred label column. So I'm going to insert more of these because probably we'll have much more terms.
And Nicola, maybe just to be clear,
Yes.
These terms that we add now, these subject terms, would be eventually like a drop-down menu in CDR, right? So whenever anybody from the ZON-LD COVID program wants to launch a new metadata description of their data set, they can go through this drop-down menu, find the subject that's most relevant to their data set and click that one, select that one. Yeah.
And another thing is that besides being part of the CDR, another thing is that you're providing resolvability to those terms or anybody else. So if I go to this link, I'm just going to show you what we have because you already built this project ZON-LD project content template. You filled it in, Barbara did it, I think, with your own. And you can see now there's a lot of terms that you define, which then become fully accessible and resolvable. So if I go to this, for example, so the same thing, what you're going to fill in this template will be accessible through this ontology. We already have things set up for you like ZON-LD subjects. And as I said, now we have only deprecated as a term that has been defined. But as you're entering other labels here, you're creating those terms and they will be accessible on OntoStack and BioPortal and through CDR drop-down menu.
And maybe another another suggestion for everybody, you can think about the data sets. So there's this list that we showed you from Barbara of subject terms, but you might just say, hey, in the projects that I'm working on, what are the kinds of data sets we have and what kind of subjects and topics does that cover?
Yes, exactly.
So what might be also good is that we, Barbara and myself, of course, worked on the, let's say, the project content template publication. But together, we all worked already at a Google Sheet to harvest all the relevant, let's say, call it subjects, but also a more granular term list. So, for example, what is it? Area should be somewhere in or care setting.
Yeah,
I guess. And care setting includes specification like home care, transmural, GP, etc. So that's already done. And that was what Nikolai was pointing at the OntoStack viewer or at BioPortal. So that that we should of course make use of directly. And we you can use the terms, but the only thing is that instead of like Nikolai does with the identifier providing a readable term, we use numbers. So that's something we need to align then.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can change it. It's just like for simplicity that for the exercise that they are currently, the identifiers are yeah, the characters or the readable identifier instead of the name. But we can change this if anybody, if that's okay with you, I can quickly change this. So instead of having this identifier, you have a number.
And let's see what will be convenient. So everyone can view the document which is currently posted by me, which Barbara and myself set up. And the green terms are those that can be used at the data level. So the yellow ones or the orange ones, it's always tricky to see if this is orange or yellow. Those are the ones used in the project content template to choose from, and the green ones can be used at the data level. So those are already defined. So you can either copy paste them. Nikolai will need to see what's convenient.
Sure, no problem at all. I can put this acute care, post-COVID care, rehabilitation, just to show you the process. So
yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah. So I'm just going to put these instead of, so if I put them here, I think I can say past values only, so it doesn't, and then I can actually go and you have, because you have a definitions for some of them. And then I can copy paste. I was just going to find definition. So there is it from this one. And if I paste here and then do the same thing, values only. So now I have this English definition as well, and then we can see that there are sources which are pulled from somewhere. So definitions came from somewhere. So I can do the same thing. So that's a DCT source. Here and down, and then again, past values only. Now we have DCT source, and they might be exact match. They are borrowed from another vocabulary. So I'm just going to do the same thing over here. Okay, so now I have inserted four, and I can see that somebody is adding organization of care and prevention as a subject. So you see the process. You just like, let's start doing this. Like you have both, you have now those two links, one from that your own posted and one from Eric, which I'm going to show to you again. So you're under these potential subjects, look at those, identify those that you think that they can find their place in this control vocabulary, just simply copy paste it. Then we can deal with definitions as well. So what is the time now? It's 10:52. Let's do that for the, let's try to do that for the next, let's say, half an hour or so, and then we make a short break. And ask questions as you go through this, because I'm going to monitor what you're doing. And don't bother if the colors are changing. We will fix that. So don't be distracted by that. The column, the color of cells and so on. Also, if you're a native Dutch speaker, feel free to translate those English perf labels into Dutch in the column next to the over here.
I have a question, Nicola.
Yes, yes.
It will be possible to offer multiple subject labels in a data set?
Definitely, that's right. So the way how we set up the control, how we set up GDMT is that you can have, 0 to n subjects. So yeah, there is no limitation there. And actually, it's quite good. I find that very useful that you give as many subjects as possible, because then you make your data set interesting to more people.
Yeah, and you could have quite some specification on your data set by using multiple labels.
So let's keep on going until 11:15. Then we will take a break for 5 minutes. After which we will do the rest of this pipeline for generating and then publishing the control vocabulary. So you don't need to build, the whole idea is that you don't need today to build the entire control vocabulary, but to get experience with this process, which you're actually doing quite well, because we have quite a number of terms that you've been like posting and defining. And it's nice that we start having as well preferred labels in Dutch and the definition in Dutch, because then I can demonstrate you that this ability that you can access different language properties of the term that you define.
So it's human language interoperability, not
Yes.
only
Not
human
only machine.
computer. Yeah. Okay.
You can imagine how some of the control vocabularies from the United Nations are built. They come in all of the languages. So they have also a lot of terms, but also all those terms are defined in multiple languages, which is quite good.
Yeah.
And as I said, like if you have any questions, feel free to ask while we're doing the exercise. Renate, don't be embarrassed. Feel free to ask. Turn on the microphone. There are no stupid questions. We were all beginners in this, so please don't be shy.
I added the impact of measures and strategies, and now I'm looking for the SCOS definition, and I don't have an idea where to look for it.
Okay, so impact. Do you know what it represents? Because I don't know what that it means, to be honest.
Now I chose it because I know that the researcher I'm working with is working on a project that is measuring the impact of the 1.5 meter social distancing measure. And that's why I thought, no, sounds like it.
Yeah, but exactly what you said to me now, if you can put it in the sentence there, that could be like, it's a good starting point. We can always update the definition.
So I make the definition.
Yeah, that's right. So if there are,
I thought I need to.
Sorry. No. What I was saying, okay, sorry everybody if I made this more confusing. When I was saying, I'm just going to say that this is in case that you are not able to define it with your own words, and you know that definition exists somewhere already, then you go and reach out and use the definition. If it doesn't exist and you know how to define it, feel free to put your own definition. So Renate, feel free to put your definition. That's okay. Even better, because in the previous workshops, people were usually stuck like, okay, we don't know what it means, so they were looking for definitions on Wikipedia and so on. But you define it now so well, so please do that. Put the definition in the column for English and also for Dutch. If you can translate it in Dutch, that would be great.
Okay.
And so, Nicola, in the basic rule would be to reuse definitions whenever possible.
Exactly. And that's what
when that's not easy or not possible, then
feel free to define it.
Yeah.
If you know how to define it. If you don't know how to define it, but you know that your colleagues, your researchers you're working with, know what it is, you reach out to the researcher. That's usually the case. I'm just going to give you an idea how we did it in wind energy when we were defining a similar control vocabulary, but with wind energy, what we did, we created a group of wind energy experts, and with them we defined the terms, and we created definitions. This is called how it's called solicited development of control vocabulary. But that's something that you can do as well with your research group. But simply, this is the exercise, so you get familiar with the sheet and see how this process works, and then really it's really an ongoing process of maintaining, building, curating the control vocabulary. We cannot do it in a few hours, that's for sure. But what we can do in this few hours is to go through the whole process. So you get the snapshot of the whole process, and then it is very much to you to decide where your heart at. Is your heart in maintaining or doing the technical thing, organizing meetings, setting up the technical infrastructure, and so on. There is various possibilities what kind of role you can play in the fair data.
And we'll mention it later at the end, but we are setting up on June 16th a first meeting of a governance group, kind of a launch or a kickstart of the governance group, and that would be, for example, this these experts who would be entrusted with the definitions of these terms, among other things.
Okay, that's good to hear, because I was also struggling with what to fill in, because I'm a central data steward and I speak to the researchers, but I don't know exactly what they are collecting and what the definition is of all the things they are doing. I can help them in the process, but this to me was very detailed.
I know, but now you experience it. So actually tomorrow when you talk with them, you can fire up the sheet and say, hey, what are the preferred? This is what I'm defining. I need your help. You need to give me the information so we can I can inject that inside of the control vocabulary. So sorry if anybody feel intimidated. It's good. Like usually, purposely I move you out of your comfort zone. So because you get now the idea what's going on. Edward, you had a question. You had a raised hand.
Yes. So sorry, I had to take some urgent phone calls. So I kind of missed what we're doing here. I tried to figure out, but is it the idea that we take one of the terms from the sheet with all the green and then try to put it in the other sheets? Okay, can you maybe briefly?
Sure, absolutely. So you already did quite a bit of work in the previous workshop. So we have one thing is that Barbara pulled out some of the terms from this link. I'm just going to copy paste it again inside of the chat. And there is another one that Jeroen mentioned, which is for the project content, and the green field in this one. You can actually check those green fields and figure out they're a suitable candidate for the terms in this control vocabulary of subject you're building. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I'm more asking, like, what are we doing currently? Should I just take one term and try to fill it in, or something that I work on? Because just yesterday I joined the whole program, so I don't know exactly
you're new.
What the projects are.
That's right. So basically you understand what the subjects are. So subjects are, as I was presenting, subjects represents a thing that you can investigate with data. And so we have these two sources where you can pull out the subject. For you, maybe because you're new to the whole thing, maybe you can find, if you cannot find the subject in those two Google Sheets that you can paste inside of that one, maybe define one subject yourself.
Okay.
And what you're putting, like, as I said, like you put the prefer label, then make a definition of this term. So you might borrow the definition first. If there is already existing definition somewhere on the web, you just use that one. If it doesn't exist, like Renata was doing herself, you can define it your own.
Okay, thanks.
And what is very important when we go to break is that you hit Control S if you're using Windows, or Command S if you use Mac, and then close the sheet, because if multiple of us are having the Google Sheet open, the Google GitHub will not be able to pull the Google Sheet. So that's another important thing. Okay, it's 11:15. So as I said, like, hit Control S or Command S and close the Google Sheet, just to be sure that the GitHub will be able to grab the Google Sheet document, because otherwise it will detect that it's open and will not be able to convert to IDF. So please just close down the Google Sheet from tab of your browser. So we have, so people are getting down, have your own. Okay, feel free to go to the coffee break. In the meantime, I will slightly improve how the Google Sheet document looks like, and then we will do the remaining part of the pipeline, which will convert this into the RDF and spin it on the onto stack and push it to the buy portal. So take a break. We see you at 11:20.
Thanks, Nicola. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Nicola and I were just talking, maybe it's a good idea to start up again with just a reflection, or to see if anyone has questions about the last experience here. I'm grateful to Renata for bringing up her question.
Yes.
That was, I think, yeah, punctuating the situation very nicely. So thank you.
And if you have anything to add, Renata, please go for it. We would like to steer and get the discussion going, because we know that we all throw you into this rather rapidly today. It was on purpose as well, a little bit. So
my problem, or it's going fast. Okay, we are hearing it for the first time. Okay, but then to get from the theoretical part to the practical part, and to really go ahead and build that vocabulary within half an hour. I know we are not going to do it all in this half hour, but it's all for me at least. And I'm a general data steward also. I know what my researcher, what the title is, and I generally know what she's doing, but that's all that I don't know anymore.
Good point. Yeah, you're right. So we try to come up with a blend of this general information, and then jumping into the practical aspect is really feeling what it is about, because usually workshops such as these they put too much focus on concepts and ideas, and not is really teaching anybody how this process really goes through. And the idea is just to give you a tooling so you can feel it yourself, as you did now. And these questions will always arise, even if you take this material and present to your researchers, they will also be the same level of confusion as you did. So, but now you experienced a little bit of like what it takes, and we didn't complete it. There's like a few extra steps where we are going to spin this, and that becomes available. And this is where it will become even more interesting, is that any modification you make can be really immediately represented online and becomes available basically everywhere. So that's the idea. And
but that makes me nervous.
Huh?
That makes me very nervous.
Don't worry, because this the whole I mean, listen, the good thing about everything which is software or on web, you can always repair. It's not the machine that you're destroying. So that's what I'm trying to say. Like, be liberated from that kind of stress. And honestly, like we are constantly making mistakes. I do it like daily, and it's normal. It just becomes part of your work. Okay, it doesn't work, I'm just going to change it. Now it's working. It's the hope. That's why and you don't need to be nervous if you make a mistake, because we are using Google Sheet and it has a history, so you can always go back. There's this beauty about it. You can always go back, and because everything is on GitHub, also we can go back. So there is no worry at all. That's why it's like really open playground for making not constantly, to making different mistakes each time, so we improve. And the whole idea is like, even as Eduard asked, like he's new, so he doesn't know what are the subjects, and that's why I said, like, define one yourself. Just feel the process. That's that's the whole idea. Because then, as you said, like you're general data steward, so you know what they're doing, but you're not like coming from I guess you're not coming from a domain, and now you're like inside, and that's of course it's in itself a challenge, because you don't know exactly the domain. It's much easier for data stewards who were maybe once researchers and they transition to be support staff for the research. Then for them it's much easier to start defining, because they know this. That's like, for me it's much easier for wind energy, because I spent 15 years in wind energy. Of course I can define the terms, I know what they're talking about in my domain. But it is this, then as I said, like, you will start identifying your role in the whole process of, like, that you can say, hey, I have this tooling, this is how it looks like, I need these things from you, this is what they represent, and let me define them for you. So it's really a separation of concern and separation of responsibilities, but feeling, I've really wanted everybody to feel the process. So you're not, you now know when tomorrow when somebody talks about control vocabulary, say, I know what it is and I know how it's built. It's not anymore unknown. I know you felt uncomfortable, and many of you did in this process, but it's a good thing. You're learning. Don't feel ashamed. Don't feel threatened, and don't worry. Everything can be repaired. That's what I want to say. Like, really, everything can be repaired. So no worries at all.
Okay, that's good to know.
And listen, I'll tell you, on the second day you will do the same thing, but with the template. And again, don't worry. When we go on the day 2. Make mistakes, and you'll be taught through the process. And then really you might find that this is super interesting to you, and then say, hey, actually I love this, so I want to learn more. And then we can always go in more details. But we try to find a balance on the how deep or how low we should go. And it's hard. It's hard to find a balance. Yeah.
The second thing that intrigues me is, we're here now with 16 people by now, and we are representing now a group of 130 COVID-19 projects.
Indeed.
And we are 16 in I see the chat, it says 16, but there were only 10 or so orchids filled in. So we're doing this now with 10 people to represent the rest of the 130. And I think, whoa, what a pressure.
No, but that's it's again, like I tried to repeat several times that there was this governance workshop, and it's you're a pioneer in this. That's the thing. Like, of course, people will, to be honest with you, don't get me wrong, initially they will not appreciate what you did, but in the long run, and they will say, why did you define it this way? But in the long run, they will be very thankful. And I know the data stewardship role isn't extremely grateful. That's the same thing like with the IT departments and libraries and universities, because we always, like, they throw rocks on us. But anyways, you're the crucial part here. Maybe Eric and Margaret can add more to this as well. So
I would just say, absolutely, everyone here is a pioneer. And I would say this whole program is a kickstart. So, and then it's the building the airplane while we fly it. Nothing is off the shelf here. Everything is in development at the moment. And as we begin to wind up, this phase of the program where we build these 3 templates and begin to deploy them, we'll start figuring out ways to publish these results and these activities and your contributions on there. And these will all be, could be seen as a kind of research project, also in the COVID program, but this is then a way to show the world, a method by which machine actionable metadata that's built by the community, what that looks like. And like I said, we will begin next week working with the antimicrobial resistance and infectious disease group, who are going to re-examine the vocabularies that you have built and consider them for use in their own program. And so, if all this works out, we envision that this is a more systemic thing. And Nicola and Barbara have worked really hard. All of us have worked very hard over the last, I would say, 6 weeks to try and already begin to consolidate everything we've done up to now. So hopefully what's happened in the last 6 months can be replicated in 4 weeks for AMR. And that would be huge, right? That would be enormous. So we hope we can get a lot of scalability out of what now is a very pioneering, frontier type of activity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm very curious and in a positive way.
Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, and again, to really say thank you for everyone who's, because I know everybody's already overcommitted, and here's a whole nother set of spreadsheets and links and new terminology. I know it's hard. So it's really fantastic that you're here, and we're also trying to make sure that we're getting the most bang out of the buck here as well.
Okay. And thank you for all the effort, because I'm totally convinced of the benefits of this, because I'm from a library. I'm a metadata specialist, so I know in theory what we are doing, but to convert this with machine readable things, that's new for me. So I'm with you, but it's a learning process. And
it is.
And then your feedback, Renata, is well, it's already been paying off big time, because the mini guidelines that we sent out with the content that was inspired by the conversation we had following the other session. So really, it's great that you speak out and flag all the issues. This is the co-development aspect of what we're doing. Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Super.
Great to be of help.
Nice.
Any other reflection, comments? I mean, they're very welcome, and we're here really to make this ride as enjoyable as possible. Though we are putting you on purpose, we are not driving through the straight roads like in Denmark or Netherlands, but we go to the bumpy one and climbing the mountains. So that's because it's better view up there. It's much better viewed up there. So
we're not used to mountains here. But I want to add one thing to what Renata said and what you're all saying, that so this is really the development phase and the first implementations for COVID. But everything that we learn from this will enter a real implementation. How are we going to put this in our regular program procedures? And that will be an issue for the next coming weeks and months at Sonnenweg, also together with the other people. So for Renata and all the other data experts, don't be afraid that this is the only thing that you rely on. We will need to build more instructions in our procedures as well. Yeah.
And hopefully Health RI will be able to help in maintaining this community and creating it one that is from development to really being implemented everywhere in the Netherlands. So
yeah.
Okay, then I can now. That's the funny part of okay.
Can I also ask one more question?
Absolutely. Go.
Yeah, I'm still trying to visualize what the next step will be, because at some point this is finished. We developed this, and then researchers have to work with this, or because this is very technical what we're doing.
Yeah.
So how would it look like in the end? Or is it?
Yeah, so one thing is that, as Eric said, like you will see on the day 2, we were going to import some of those control vocabularies that they're already built inside of the generic dataset metadata templates. So those terms that you define, they become accessible directly by the drop-down menu. So instead of them writing or you, whoever is going to fill in the template when they're making a metadata about data, they will have already terms available that they will select. So that's one direct aspect. Another way is, like, depending on the maturity of a domain project research group, you can embed those information directly inside of about data and so on. So for example, in my case, I have control vocabulary of parameters wind energy And for example, I let my colleagues call their variables the way they want, but they are forced to use something which is ID of that variable, which is this long URL. So you can it will depend really on the level of commitment or development that you want to continue further. Another way of doing this as well is that, like, and this is more on the funding side, funders can say, hey, if you're going to apply for money for the project, you're going to use this specific control vocabulary, which can be certified, and Eric can tell you much more about certification schema. So in that case, everything that is produced is cohering to the specific control vocabulary, to specific metadata templates, and so on. And to be honest with you, Marine, I'll disappoint you. This work is never done. I don't know if you ever see this image of puppy that Eric likes to show about what the control vocabularies are. Yeah, you're always getting close to the completion, but it's never like 100% done. But it becomes more richer and more used and so on.
Yeah, and then somebody invents a new laboratory method, a new machine, and then there's new data being produced, and it needs to be described. So someone has to go back to the vocabulary and define some new terminology. So it's so long as we continue to do creative things, we will need to also run vocabulary exercises to keep up with it. And to also answer your question, Maureen, Health RI in this situation is also trying to, display the metadata that's captured at the COVID national portal environment. And because the information that we capture is well structured in the JSON-LD format, it's very easy for other third parties, for anyone to go in and then build portals to that metadata, or to be able to build search capability on top of that metadata. So we have plans in the works in the program how that will look, but it's really kind of wide open. Once you begin publishing linked data, anybody can come in and begin to do interesting things with it.
And what is now, as you know, like if somebody starts from the blank page with nothing, it's much harder to develop things. But what you are, even a few terms put in there, it helps the future work. So it kind of becomes much more understandable what it is about and what it really needs to have inside. And with all the examples, it becomes more interesting for people to use. And trust us when we say like that we are building things while we are flying. Last year, there weren't so many, almost no tools that we can do this so easily now with the Google Sheet. So we've been developing tooling to help you and anybody to remove this pressure of technical knowledge. Maybe some of you are very into the technical aspect, which will be great, of course. But it's really, we are making what was fair data philosophy into something which is fair data practice through these workshops.
Marijn, it's the portal, the portal that Eric is talking about, and basically from the content template we had already implemented some of the items in the portal. Precisely that part I can't show now, but I can show, for example, what we did with the yeah, there you go. If you go to, for example, to dashboard.
Yes.
So the dashboard is basically one of the data sets that we are looking at. So this is metadata or specific data for the clinical part. So we can, because this data has been made properly can be linked together, and we add this machine actionable, we can make it this way human readable as well. So and on the projects, that's where all of your projects are. And I have an issue with it, so I can't show you already the content metadata. So there, if you click on it, on the third one, you should see underneath already the content metadata, but I don't know, for some reason or the other, it's not there. I logged in and I get an error message. So I hope it's on Thursday to be able to show it to you.
And there is another one, like to Marine, just to show what it meant when you build those control vocabularies. Then you get this even. So one thing is when you fill in the template, and then you make an instance, and then eventually it comes to something such as this, which is like a nice portal for exploring all the content. And then you have this ability to have so-called faceted search, which then use those control terms, because then you can select, these are, for example, also control terms that we've been defining. So if you click this one, it will give you a subset. You see like how quickly it works. So you really get to the data that you really want, or to the asset that you really want once you have the control term, instead of getting everything and trying the free text search. So you enable this faceted search, which really give you exactly what you want, because it can go drill down and find those control terms if they are part of the metadata that has been instantiated.
Those last three specifically are from the content template.
Yeah, this
the ZON-MV focus area.
Yes.
And the type of provided assets. Again, this is, you see, you must recognize the.
And I can show you actually where those are pulled from. So if I go to this one, they are actually from this one, which is already on web. So if you go to the focus area, you see those terms defined there, and they're supposed to pop up.
They're still there, yeah.
So you see now, like you made this available, it's online, it can be fetched by a third-party portal, such as, for example, this one, to enhance the search results, or to enhance your way of navigating and finding the assets that you're looking for, whether there is people are looking for, or machines. Okay.
And typically what would happen in a research program at ZON-MV is that every project would end up putting their data somewhere on a repository following completely different metadata schemes, most of them not machine actionable.
Yes.
And all the money, time, effort in the COVID program would essentially be dispersed as soon as the program is over. It would be almost impossible to really pull back everything that was learned in the program.
Yeah.
And
now the data can be put in different repositories, but at least it's all findable through the machine actionable metadata via, for example, the portal. Yeah.
So we still have a very distributed environment that the researcher has lots of freedom to put things where they want to, but at the same time, we have a nice machine actionable overview of everything that happened, and it should get much easier. You know, this is the hard part, creating these forms and vocabularies, but that should get easier over time.
Yes, yes.
Nicola, you
yeah, sure. So
more to show.
Yeah, so I'm just going to show you the rest of this pipeline to show you how it operates now on GitHub. So once you fill in the template, you save it, you close it, you put the version and so on. Now it's the part that we need to convert it from Google Sheet document into the RDF and push it on the web so it's resolvable in this case, like for example, what I'm showing you on the control vocabulary viewer, ontology viewer here on the specific web server. For time being, we are resolving your terms PIDs on the vocab.fairdataquality.org, but we will discuss with ZON-MV to spin up this same stack of technology on their own web servers. So because it's always nice to have for funders to have their branding displayed, because now ZON-MV is, as you can see, it's after the org, but that's something to be discussed later. But I'm going to show you the rest of the pipeline, and then we will discuss a little bit on the closure of today's day on about the governments and what you should expect on the day too. So the whole thing is on GitHub. So you don't need to trigger these sheets to idea conversion. You really don't need to know anything about Git commands or programming and whatsoever, because it's very graphical, the whole process. Of course, you're more than welcome to learn. It's always a good skill. I received certain number of GitHub accounts and I add those to be a maintainers of the control vocabulary on GitHub. I'm showing you here an example which is not really for the ZoneNV subject, but exactly the same form. You will see exactly the same thing when I go to the GitHub repository of the control vocabulary that we were just building. So what you need to do is to click on this banner or basically a button called Sheets to RDF. Once clicked, it goes to the settings where you're going to execute the workflow. You select Sheets to RDF again, and then you click Run Workflow. Then you click again Run Workflow here, and the whole process is then automatic. You don't need to do anything. So the GitHub will trigger the process, get the Google Sheet document, convert it to RDF, test the RDF, and push it to Ontostack. And I will demonstrate to you very soon this. So I'm just going to tell you what this Sheets to RDF is doing. As I said, it's automatic workflow, and it's executed by something which is called GitHub Actions. For those who are familiar with DevOps, that's basically a so-called continuous development, continuous integration process. It is constantly used in the software development process because people don't want to do manual things over and over again. The base thing when you're a software developer, one of the best traits is to be lazy, and lazy people always come up with the simple solutions, so they don't need to work that much. So this is the same thing we're using here. So what the Sheets to RDF is doing, as I mentioned to you, basically fetches the Google Sheet document that you've been building now and converts it into the machine actionable control vocabulary, basically converts Google Sheet document to RDF. And once this RDF or this turtle file is created, it tests it and then it reports results to you. So you can see, for example, it will indicate to you that you're missing definition for certain terms. It will indicate to you that some of the URLs are strange, so they are not resolvable and so on. And in the third stage of this process, it will commit those results. It will commit, which means it will save RDF representation of this Google Sheet, as well testing logs to that Git repository. So you can always view what happened, and you always have a place where things are saved. That's why I was saying before we took a break that no worries, we can always go back. If vocabulary was better in the previous step, we go back inside, because that's this ability that Git as a version control system allows us. And in the fourth stage, that RDF is pushed to the web server and becomes available to you on this ontology viewer, but also it becomes accessible by machines. And there is also possibility to have so-called Sparkle endpoints. So you can do Sparkle queries of the control vocabularies. Sheets to RDF we're using it at DTU Wind Energy. Dike in Denmark has one. There is another one set up for International Energy Agency. And for you, we have one as well. I set up multiple Sheets to RDF GitHub repositories for each control vocabulary that we've been building so far in ZoneNV project. So what is the Ontostack? So once GitHub gets that RDF, so once it's converted, so in this fourth stage, when I said deploy things to Ontostack is a set of microservices which are interfaced such that it can intake that RDF. It stores it inside of the graph database, and then it makes that RDF accessible by humans and machines. If you access by human, you get this web page. If machine access, it can get XML, RDF, and JSON representation of for example, the entire control vocabulary or a specific term. So this is all made available for you. So that's why those, when I was saying, like, there are these specific concept URI that we need to set up, because then those URL of terms become fully resolvable. So onto Ontostack in its core, just to tell you, it has something called Edge Router, which basically it receives the requests and detects whether it's human or machine and responds accordingly. It has a graph database because that's where the RDF is stored, and it has this user interface. And these are all three services that are showing to, they're fully open source. one is for edge route, it's the traffic. For graph database, is Apache Gen of Useki. And that web browser that I showed to you of the terms, I'm just going to jump in over here. That is actually Cosmos, and that's a service that was developed by National Library of Finland and made open source to everybody. And we have many of those onto-stock instances running. I have some at the DTU Wind Energy. There is one for Dike, and internationally we run one for Fair Data Collective, and another one for the IA Wind Task 32, which is International Energy Agency. So I'm going to show you.
And Nicola, we can imagine in the future, some of those URLs would be like maybe ZoneMV.
That's right.
Or Health RI, for example.
That's right. So we can simply spin up this onto stack on another web server, and then under another domain. It could be, as I was mentioning earlier, for the branding purposes. I think it's and also for the maintenance and the ownership. It can be vocab.zonemv.org or vocab.healthri.nl. It's relatively simple to set them up. It takes about 1 day, me working with somebody who is IT or DevOps engineer in any of these organizations. So no problem at all spinning this up and branding and specifying it for the purpose of the project or funder and so on. So yes, indeed. I'm just going to show you an example. As I said, like onto stack response to resolvable identifier. I showed you earlier that WinSpeed, the long URI. If you hit it yourself inside of the browser, you get the web page. If machine access, it can retrieve RDF representation in XML format, or JSON-LD or Turtle. And then we have this ability to navigate through and so on. But I can show you already on the project content level. Let's say if I go to bacteria, I have this long URI, which represents the resolvable persistent identifier of bacteria within ZoneMV project content template. So if I go and try this URL, it will of course give me the same thing. But then if machine access, it can get this JSON-LD representation, which has exactly the same information but encoded in JSON-LD format. So if you use curl commands, you get this information. You can see here, when you were building project content vocabulary, there is this ability to show you an exact match in another vocabulary, and the same bacteria term appears in another vocabulary, and then you get, I'll also give you resolvable identifiers. So if I click on that one, it will eventually lead to the same definition, but in another control vocabulary. So it takes a little bit of time to resolve this one because it's hosted by another technology. But that's this process with the rest of the pipeline. And I will show you now, and I will demonstrate. I will go to the GitHub. I will click on. I will do this clicking, and then you will see how what you build is popping up on the under this ZoneMV subjects control vocabulary, which currently has only deprecated because that was before we did the exercise. Just check whether you have anything else to show. And then we will talk a little bit later about BioPortal, how we link this to the BioPortal so this becomes accessible, what you built already on 2 days from now when we start modifying the GDMT. So let me go to the GitHub repository, which I set up for, and hopefully it will work, because there were like many of us editing this Google Sheet, and I noticed that it didn't like that when there's too many people that have an open window. So as I said, like so far, just going to show you who I added as a members. Manage access. So I have so far, these are the people who actually responded to that CEDAR form and reported their GitHub accounts. So I have the following person, probably you can identify as I have Marguerite here, and I send invites. So all of you who reported your GitHub account, I add you as a maintainer. So you have a full privileges to do whatever you want on this repository. So you will be able to reproduce the same process that I'm now going to do with clicking. And don't worry, I'm going to prepare you a YouTube video of what I'm doing, so you can do it even without me. So it is, we click here, which is this automatic workflow, which is called Sheets to RDF. Then I select Sheets to RDF, run workflow, and then run workflow, and hopefully it will work. So there was some tricks happening this morning. So you see now it's executed, and if I click on it, it will start the workflow, and you will see these stages that I was describing to you, fetching the Google Sheet, and so on. And what is happening is that on some virtual machine somewhere, it is installing everything and spinning up. Let's see. This is the error that I was getting this morning, but I'm getting it again. This typically happens if there is multiple people having this Google template open. So basically, the Google Drive locks access to the Google Sheet. But let me try to quickly fix this. Just going to stop sharing screen. So when you see this, usually that's what's happening, that multiple people looking at the same Google Sheet. So just let me make the copy of that template that we made, so that copy nobody has access to, so I can demonstrate the rest of the process. So I'm just going to stop the share screen so I can do that while working.
We will embed a Skype direct link to Nicola.
No, sure, absolutely. I mean, I'm available, of course. I mean, because this is, yeah. Because one of the libraries of which I didn't develop but I'm using in this process has been recently updated, having this causing these things to happen. So I need to actually build my own library to avoid these issues happening in future, because typically when you depend on somebody else's contribution. So let me try again. So make sure it works. Check if somebody is active. Yeah. Let's try it again. And you can see now it's not green anymore because it failed. So it will indicate whether it run or not. So hopefully it worked this time. Otherwise, I will need to fix it. Make it okay. No, still having an error. This is not great. Let's do this. Let's see. Just to check if there is. should be okay. So this is what I'm copying here is the sheet ID that Google has. Just let me be sure that it's not. Okay. It's a close. It's not open. Yeah, now it worked. I will make this more robust, of course, because I need, as I said, like I will remove the dependency of the third party, like because it was somehow it was still detected that people were looking at the vocabulary, but that's not your concern. I will fix that. Anyways, now when it goes through this process, as I said, it will convert and push the control vocabulary onto stack. It's also good that you see that things are not always running as smooth as expected. But now let's see what we have as a subjects. And you can see now we have much more than we had before. So these are all the subjects that you define. And now you see all your control, all your ORCID IDs being shown as a creator. You have a description. We have the URI of the concept, and actually the whole vocabulary can be now downloaded as entirely. If I click on that one, we get this, all the terms. You can see what happened now. That Google Sheet has been converted to this big RDF representing all that information that you embedded. You can see now as a DCT creator, all your ORCID IDs are here. Then you see all of the information that you know, all the terms that you defined. So they are there. And then if I go, because we don't have hierarchy, but we have just simply flat structure for time being. If I click on education, for example, you see this is the preferred label. But since you also provided the label in Dutch, it shows up here and nicely indicating which language it was provided. And this is the source from which we borrowed the definition that pops up here as well. And then again, this whole term, besides the human readable component, has also machine actionable components. So that's when things are running smooth, that's what happens at the end of the day. That things are pushed there. And as I said, if I go back to the Git repository, what is actually creator are a copy of the Google Sheet, but as an Excel document. Then this is your RDF control vocabulary that was converted into the process, but also it has comma separate value representation of that sheet itself. And what you can see now, you can see the test results of the conversion under the logs folder. So if I go and check RDF-test as a log, I can see information what went smooth or what didn't went smooth. So there are certain tests that are performed. They're performed like there are some empty labels. Since we provided labels for all of the terms, there are no problems. But then there is like, it indicates here incomplete language coverage, but in case that there are some, because for some terms you provided the Dutch translation, for others you didn't, and this test will indicate you which of those terms are missing Dutch translation. There are terms for which you didn't provide definition, and you can get more details if you scroll down. So once we find, for example, incomplete language tag, it will indicate you which of those terms missed the Dutch preferred label. And when it comes to, and if you want more information what this error really means, you have this nice link. So if I copy paste that link, it will give you more details what this error is. So, and it gives you description, it gives you example, and also implementation, what to do in case this happens. So you always navigate it and help through the process. And you just simply scroll down, you see all the things that are missing, like undocumented concept means that we were missing definition for some of those terms. And no common languages, that there is no problem with that. Missing label, this is fine. Like this is just basically that indicates that we don't need to have actually RDF label for this because it's a concept schema. For some reason it reports it, but you should not be worried about that. So that's where you get this. And why it's like indicates your orphan concept is because usually you put this hierarchy, and as it is now, these all concepts belong to the whole control vocabulary. So you should not be worried about this warning that is showing to you. So that's as I said, like you have all these test results displayed and with a nicely formulated meaning. What if you need more information, just follow those links provided on the detailed information. And every time you trigger the sheets to RDF with a new control vocabulary version that you created, it will save these logs as well, and you can go back in past and look at the logs. So if I can click back here again, you see there is this option history. That's why we're using GitHub, because we can always jump back from different commits. You can see that I already started building and testing things in the May, and I can always go back. So in February, I created the first instance of this repository and triggered for the first time the whole process of generating control vocabulary out of the Google Sheet document. Okay, questions?
Who's going to be the person to check that error log?
Yeah, so that comes very much to the governance of ideally in your group you should have at least one tech lead, somebody who will for example like me trigger this process, check whether this sheets to RDF is working properly, communicate with me if sheets to RDF is not working, so I can help to debug things, and that's the person that will also check the logs and report back to whoever is the main administrator of the whole process of building control vocabulary. So you have this two very vital persons, somebody who is the admin of the vocabulary, and that person might be at the same time tech lead, but it might be that you have a separate person taking that responsibility of being the tech lead and handling all the technical challenges with the production of the control vocabulary. Just one thing before we, there's just last step that we need to do in today's talk. Just need to stop sharing to find my slides, and that is to connect BioPortal to read control vocabulary from the GitHub. So ideally, that should be somebody that I don't know whether we can identify already in this group a person that will be a tech lead, so he or she can do this last exercise together with me, because we have a video how you're doing this process of actually connecting to BioPortal. Does anybody volunteer? That's the question now.
Yeah, and this is also a little bit of segues into the discussion on governance that I can lead at the very end today as well. So both in this workshop, but then in the broader sense of the COVID program, we'll be starting to identify people who would be willing to act as tech, tech maintainers or content maintainers.
Okay, I'm just going to show you the last bit of today before we jump into the discussion about governments that we will start today, but you will have a dedicated workshop for that. So just a sec. So you see now that we managed to, with some bit of technical challenges, to spin out the control vocabulary on the web and to make those terms resolvable. But from the perspective of using those control vocabularies directly in Cedar, we need to configure BioPortal to get that TTL file that I'll show you, which is the RDF representation control vocabulary, and index it inside of its own database. So BioPortal allows you, probably some of you already visited it, you can browse different libraries of different ontologies that are part of its library. You can search for terms, you can browse mappings between terms in different ontologies. But what is, as I said to you, the most critical thing for us is that by uploading it to the BioPortal and indexing control vocabulary in BioPortal, we make that control vocabulary available in the templates that we are building in Cedar. So the process is, I made a video walkthrough of how this is set up. So I mean, I can of course configure that for you after today, but it will be very nice that somebody does that, because he or she will then take the lead in future in doing this and any kind of updates. And as I said, like the whole process is relatively simple, and I made a video which doesn't have audio, but it has the steps highlighted how that is done. And for time being, I can do it, or ideally, if some of you would like to do that, that would be great as well, because we have all the components ready to upload, or in this case, configure BioPortal to automatically load sheets to RDF vocabulary and make it available for you in 2 days from now.
And Nicola, below that YouTube video, you actually, I think, break down the by
Yes.
time points, the different things going on there.
Yeah, so not in this one, but the one that we are going to do on the day 2.
Yeah.
But you're right, because this is like simple, like 15 steps that you need to perform, which I actually describe here as well here. So it's relatively simple. This demonstrates on another control vocabulary, but it's exactly the same process for the control vocabulary which we have now under this ZON-LD subjects. But I can of course configure this after today's workshop, so it's ready for you on 2 days from now. But as I said, like, you can try this process yourself using the video walkthrough, because we don't hear any volunteers now to do this. And we have like about 15 minutes, which I think is good to use for governance discussion, Eric.
Yeah, so any questions at this point?
I don't think so. I was just going to stop sharing screen so you can actually fire up the slides about governments. I know this was even more intimidating. So yeah, this is the technical part. I tried to make it as simple as I could. But there are some challenges there as well, but not to worry. We are improving the whole process and making it more simple. But as I said, this is something that there will be a person that you need to allocate inside of the whole ZON-LD that will handle the technical challenges. It's very useful. There is some kind of tech lead, so you don't need to worry about that aspect. Maybe some of you will become more like a data steward with more like data engineering aspects to the whole problem. But don't worry, I will configure Buyer Portal for you after the workshop, and this what you build will be available to you on when is like that's Thursday. Am I right? Yes, on Thursday. So not to worry.
And Nicola, if you could, yeah, let me have the screen. We'll come back and begin just the last comment here for the day, which is this idea about vocabulary. So there is the content level or the content areas, like just maintaining terminologies, the definitions on those, likely to change. Terms can be deprecated, new terminologies will come. And then there's also the technical elements, like Nicola was just showing. I stole this screenshot from his screen share, where, yeah, there could be technical issues that have to be dealt with as well. And unless we hire Nicola and Barbara full time to work as our metadata crew, these are things that we are going to have to learn over time to do ourselves. And by we, I mean, you know, in the broader sense, the Dutch data stewards community. So not every person needs to know everything, every step of every process, but it's now a job for us going forward to figure out, you know, what are the roles that are necessary here, and how do we find the right people to match them. So this is really coming down to this metadata for machines vocabulary governance. And, you know, we've mentioned before that the puppy analogy, getting the puppy home and being able to kind of cuddle the first few days is great, but then you begin to realize that that they need food and they need to grow up and they need to chew on everything and they need to poop, and all of a sudden it becomes this maintenance program, but well worth it in the end for sure. And excuse me, this is a document authored primarily by Barbara. It's getting to be a pretty clean document now, pretty shareable. I can put this link, you all have it. I'll put it in the Zoom chat just as well. But this is the guidelines for the metadata for machine workshops that we've been entering into. And chapter 3 of this document is about the long-term governance. And this is, again, maybe mainly Barbara thinking it through of what we're going to need for the long-term governance. And, you know, I won't go through the details here, but maybe it's enough to show that Barbara has been able to identify some key roles. So there's something called a maintenance body. There's the technical administrator, the content administrator. There's a vocabulary core group or core expert group. So this is where I think a lot of the work that you've seen in terms of defining terms, you know, so identifying terms, giving them definitions, that's really the business of this core expert group. We'll need vocabulary domain experts, so people in their specific scientific roles, and there's external users in the community at large. And Barbara also loves to draw Padlets. So this is a Padlet view of those roles. And, you know, I think it tends to look a little bit overcomplicated right now, but again, these are different kinds of activities that need to happen. And we can find people or teams of people to help facilitate those. And I drew a red box around the vocabulary administrator and the vocabulary core expert group. And on May 26th, I sent off an email to a list of 7 metadata for machine champions that we have. And some of those people are on this call today. And the idea here is that, and this is sort of just a highlights from that email that I sent out, but we're asking essentially everybody, but we started with these 7 people, to consider taking a role in the vocabulary core group. And so really kind of helping to maintain these terminologies. The main tasks will be fielding the ongoing requests around vocabularies. And specifically, you need to perform functions that you've seen now in the metadata for machine workshops, working with Jeroen, with Barbara, and it's like filtering and accepting new terms, providing definitions and mappings. So, over time, that stuff will get easier because you've seen it a couple times and you know how it works. We will have a meeting June 16th with the first group who are interested in taking roles in this ongoing governance thing. If you're interested, just send me an email and we'll include you on the planning for this June 16th meeting. Jeroen has graciously agreed to be the vocabulary content administrator. And I hope I'm not over speaking for him right now, but he will take the lead as kind of this administrator. And so he will actually do the implementation of these changes or these updates that the vocabulary core group make. So I can imagine, Nicola, perhaps for now, even Jeroen might be assuming some of the roles here on the dataset template in vocabulary.
A good point.
Yeah. Jessica was chatting through the Zoom chat offline with me, and she's not feeling herself comfortable enough to be at this point like a vocabulary content administrator or doing the technical stuff. But I think she is interested in maybe kind of apprenticing for a while and seeing how it's done. So we could even gather some people around Jeroen, for example, kind of train them up, and in that way too, we don't really have a single point of failure, right? We can kind of spread the knowledge around and get people who can equally do this work. And of course, the Sheet 2 RDF pipeline. We want in the core vocabulary group, we want at least 4 people. Again, that's just to try and share the workload and to make sure we don't have a single point of failure. And if we have these 4 people with the administrator, that's 5 people. So if there needs to be a vote or a decision, there will always be a tiebreaker there. But 4 is minimum. We would love to have more people. So if you're interested, like I say, please go ahead and contact me. We'd like to expand this group as much as we can. And this is all, in the next weeks, right? We want to try and set up a governance group in the next, say, four weeks or so. The qualifications at this point are something that I think everyone here fulfills. So you should be coming from different backgrounds and domains. We want to have a diverse group here. And ideally, you would have participated in some metadata for machine workshops. And so, yeah, just go ahead and contact me. And that's the last slide I have to show for today. There's just the agenda. But that's the last slide I have to show. If there's any questions or discussion, we've got another 7 minutes here.
Do I understand it correctly that you're looking for those experts to maintain the vocabulary beyond the COVID-19 projects that we are involved in?
But let's say initially, right, the first priority would be that the COVID program continues now for another 2 years, I believe. So we have 24 months where we will need vocabulary maintenance on the things we've created in so far. And, maybe there's other people now, we'll see as time goes on, maybe there will be additional data set templates created fit to different data set types. So that will be ongoing. In addition to that, we start parallel tracks now with the AMR and infectious disease groups. So they will also have equally well this kind of need. And they will need experts from their domain to participate in this group as well. So indeed, this is a group that should somehow outlive any particular project or program, and will more and more become a little bit agnostic to the domain specific elements. although there will be a base of people from these different domains that can intelligently curate these vocabularies going forward. But yeah, this is a long-term thing. This is the puppy thing. We have a puppy now. So there's no turning back. We have to take care of the puppy. Yeah. Any other comments on this? Like I say, if you're interested, just send me an email and we'll take it from there. We were thinking too, the initial commitment, maybe it makes sense to kind of join this group with the idea that you would be active for about a year minimally. If it's not your cup of tea at the end of that, then no problem, you can move on. But I think a year-long commitment is probably a smart way to go. And we figure, Barbara and I were thinking about it, it's probably not more than 50 hours, 50 hours throughout the year. So it's some work, it's some responsibility. I think it's wise to clear this activity with your supervisor, your boss. Just, people would need to know that you need to find another 50 hours this year for that kind of work. And if they can allow that for you.
Just for clarity, 50 hours from each of the representatives, not
Correct.
50 hours total, right?
Correct, because a lot of the work will be to, like as groups, right? Like maybe coming together. I think Barbara in the guidelines was mentioning initially like one meeting every 2 months. And it might be an hour or two just to kind of come together and reassess where the vocabulary status is and make some decisions, and then you can move on. So there might be kind of periodic meetings that are group oriented, and then there might be some work in between there, in between the meetings. Does that match your expectations, Nicola, on what you were thinking as well for this?
Yeah, definitely. Because somebody needs to take over and then handle, especially, what I was showing now, of course, technical challenges, but there are other challenges as well. And I'm agreed with having your hands.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking to make little in-between steps in deciding to participate in this, and to make it easy for people to at least contribute or participate in the June 16 meeting. I can imagine that you want to get a feeling what it all means for you. So, well, it's an open for discussion, of course, but I would say participate in the June 16 meeting to get more information, what it will mean for you and your work before you make a definite decision. And also, this is part of the implementation at Zonway, how to deal with this task. It's actually a shared task for research institutes, funders, and health service or data services like HealthRI.
And so even though, we're asking people to do some work, I think, Margreet, the same conversation is happening at these higher levels. Mm-hmm. How can we mandate people to do this work? How can we find them the time and the resources to do this work?
Yep.
What we don't want to do is just continuously overburden people by just adding more and more jobs on their plate. If we can make this a little bit more formal, then it is something that maybe you can formally carve out of your job duties. You can say, hey, 1 day a week or 1 day a month, I'm doing this work.
And you will also help design how we should be implementing this for a broader spectrum of programs. So
okay, so Nicola, real quick, what are we doing Thursday?
Yeah, on Thursday, I'm just going to, I can quickly show you the slides. Actually, we have only one slide deck, which will talk about how you're building machine actionable metadata templates. So this is general introduction of the process that you're doing, and then we will introduce once again how this is done in Cedar and why we are using Cedar. And we have actually quite a lot of small exercises for you when you're going to modify generic dataset metadata template. And following that exercise, everybody will create a modified version of GDMT for themselves and introduce a control vocabulary that you build during the previous workshops. But also, if there is enough time, you can modify it with the control vocabulary that we built today as well. So you might get to the point where you modified 2 out of the 3 fields in the GDMT, which should be modified to source control vocabulary specific to zone invest. So that's again even more practical than today, with far less of me talking and presenting, and like I think I have like about I'll tell you just in a sec to be sure. I think it's about 8 small exercises that we will do. Just a sec, just to share the screen with you. So you have 1 presentation, but in total, I lied to you. There is 10 exercises, 10 small exercises, and for every exercise there is a very clear set of instructions and video walkthrough in case. For those that are not able to come on Thursday, they can try to do this exercise on their own, in their own time and whatever, but also for your own sake that you're able to repeat the procedures that we were going to do on Thursday later on. So we have that prepared for you.
And so we should have some data set templates by Thursday.
Indeed. So as you can see, the last exercise 10, is really when we are making a metadata, instantiating basically generic dataset metadata template, which you updated with the control vocabulary. Thus, you made it into the, as Eric called it earlier today, SDMT, specific dataset metadata template, and you will create metadata. So that's the last exercise of the day 2. And then
so maybe,
go.
Oh yeah, so maybe people should be thinking then between now and Thursday about what data set they would like to make some metadata for on Thursday.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Optionally, I mean, ideally, this should be a data set for which you don't have any issues to report metadata, because eventually this will be, because it's a public thing. So try to find data sets for which you can create metadata without any restrictions. That helps a lot. Alternatively, maybe the data set is already published in another platform, and in that case, we can you can use the metadata that is already reported, like let's say Zenodo, B2Share. I don't know which platforms are used in your domain, but that's where we are finishing this rapid M4M with actual metadata, which is machine actionable, and you went through the whole process of building control vocabulary, making it available on web, and then using it into the metadata template. So you've done the whole process at the end of the day 2.
Yeah. Great.
I'll stop sharing it here. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I see the time. It's already past time. But is there any other last comments or parting remarks?
I have one comment.
Yes.
When choosing a data set for practice purposes, is there somebody in this group who works with cohort studies? Because that is an urgent issue. We need to know if it's possible to make metadata for cohorts, including the time aspect of it. Is there anybody? Well, the group is small now, so
yeah.
Okay, well, we'll find out.
Yeah, that's something we can also do some homework on, Margreet, in between.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can get somebody for Thursday, or at least some action on the cohort template. Yeah. Cool. Okay, then I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody, for showing up, for the dedication again. Thanks, Nicola, for awesome slides and presentations. Very clear, very straightforward. Yeah, to everyone else, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. And yeah, you saw that things are not running always smoothly. So you saw that things are can break, and usually they break in workshops. So we are not perfect. So that's also a message. Room for improvement.
Now you tell us. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you want, we can stay for after all the participants are left. If you want to.
Yeah. So everyone's free to go. I will hang out on the line with Nicola.
And maybe just that we will send a link to the video later today.
Okay.
Just in case people need to rewind on something. It will not be on YouTube yet, as Jeroen said. It will be on a Google Drive. Because of processing times on YouTube, it's a bit might not be quick enough. So you will send you the link.
Good to know that my embarrassing moment has been recorded. So
you maybe you have the right to be forgotten, Nicola.
no, it's a reminder.